Hey there, and welcome to Crime for Sleep. I know you're having trouble falling asleep, so let me keep you company with true crime stories from around the world. Before we dive in, I'm curious, where did you first hear this one? If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Now get comfortable, and let's get into tonight's case. Story 1. I stood frozen, my gaze fixed on the door across the room. Its hinge creaked softly, not in a way that invited entry or exit, but as if acknowledging my scrutiny. The room seemed to breathe around me, the fabric of the curtains swaying even without a breeze, and the floorboards settling in a rhythm I couldn't follow. The door remained ajar, and though the light from the hallway outlined it, the gap should have whispered assurances. Instead, it conveyed a silence too deliberate. Each second stretched, each tick of the distant clock echoing uncertainty. Just when I thought it safe to turn away, a thin edge of shadow slipped into view beneath the door, its presence unaccounted for moments before. I know what happened that night. I've told the story so many times that it feels carved into stone, each detail polished smooth by repetition. My sister came home late from her job at the diner. She was tired, always tired those days, working double shifts to pay for her nursing classes. I heard her key in the lock, heard her shoes drop by the front door with that familiar thud-thud sound she always made. She called out good night from the hallway, and I called back from my room where I was studying for my psychology exam. The house settled into its usual quiet. Our old rental had its own language of creaks and sighs, sounds I'd grown to find comforting. I remember the radiator clicking on around midnight, the way it always did when the temperature dropped. I fell asleep to the sound of my sister moving around in her room next door, the gentle bump of furniture against the wall as she got ready for bed. In the morning, she was gone. The police were methodical in their questions. They asked about her routine, her friends, whether she had any problems with money or relationships. I answered everything with the certainty of someone who knew their sibling completely. She was responsible, predictable even. She wouldn't just disappear without telling me. Something had happened to her, something beyond her control. The detective assigned to her case had kind eyes but a tired voice. He explained that adults have the right to leave, that most missing persons cases resolve themselves when people return on their own. But I knew better. My sister wasn't the type to cause worry unnecessarily. She left notes when she'd be late from work. She called if her plans changed. The idea that she would simply walk away from her life, from me, felt impossible. For weeks I clung to this certainty like a life raft. I made flyers, called her friends, checked every place she might go. I knew the story by heart. Responsible young woman vanishes without explanation, leaving behind a confused sibling and a life half built. It was clean, tragic, and completely believable. But then I found the journal. It was tucked behind her dresser, wedged between the wooden back and the wall in a way that suggested it had been hidden deliberately. The leather cover was worn soft from handling, and when I opened it, I recognized her handwriting immediately. But the words themselves seemed to belong to a stranger. She wrote about feeling watched, about shadows that moved wrong in her peripheral vision. She described coming home to find small things out of place. A coffee cup moved from one counter to another, a book opened to a different page, her bedroom door standing open when she was certain she'd closed it. The entries grew more frequent as the weeks progressed, her handwriting becoming increasingly erratic. The last entry was dated 2 days before she disappeared. In it, she wrote about hearing footsteps in the hallway at night, footsteps that stopped outside her door and remained there for long minutes before moving away. She mentioned considering staying at a friend's house but worried she was losing her mind. The final line made my hands shake. I think whoever is doing this knows I'm getting close to figuring it out. I read that journal 3 times before the words really sank in. My sister hadn't been living the quiet, predictable life I thought I knew. She'd been afraid, possibly for weeks, and I, sleeping in the room right next to hers, had noticed nothing. The certainty I'd carried for months began to crack. If I'd been wrong about her emotional state, what else had I missed? I started re-examining that last night, picking apart each memory like a detective studying evidence. Had her good night really sounded normal? Had those sounds from her room actually been her getting ready for bed, or could they have been something else entirely? I remembered now that her voice had seemed slightly strained when she called out. At the time, I'd attributed it to fatigue, but replaying it in my mind, it sounded more like tension. Fear, maybe. And those sounds from her room, I'd assumed they were routine, but they'd gone on longer than usual. Furniture moving, yes, but perhaps not by her choice. The house itself began to feel different as these doubts grew. The familiar creaks and sighs that had once comforted me now seemed loaded with possibility. Every settling board could have been a footstep. Every gust of wind against the windows might have masked the sound of someone moving through our home. The radiator that clicked on at midnight, had it really been the heating system? Or had that been the sound of a door closing somewhere in the house? I started staying awake at night, listening. The old rental had thin walls and sound carried in unexpected ways. From my bed I could hear cars passing on the street, the neighbor's television through the shared wall, even the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. But there were other sounds too, ones I'd never paid attention to before. Soft scraping noises that could have been tree branches against the siding or something else entirely. The occasional creak of floorboards that I'd always assumed was the house settling, but might have been footsteps in rooms I thought were empty. One night I heard my sister's door open. The sound was unmistakable, that particular squeak of hinges that needed oil, followed by the soft whoosh of air moving through the doorway. I lay still, heart pounding, trying to rationalize what I was hearing. Old houses make strange noises. Doors can swing open if they're not latched properly. But as I listened, I heard what sounded like footsteps moving down the hallway, slow and deliberate. I forced myself to get up and investigate. The hallway was empty, bathed in the pale light from the street lamp outside. My sister's room stood open, just as it had for months since she disappeared, but something felt different. The air seemed disturbed, as if someone had recently passed through. I stepped into her room and noticed that her journal, which I'd left on the nightstand, was now on the floor beside the bed. Standing there in the darkness, I began to question everything I thought I knew. Had someone been in the house that night she disappeared? Had they been watching us, waiting for the right moment? The journal suggested she'd been aware of an intruder, but I'd been oblivious. How could I have slept through whatever happened to her? But then a more troubling thought crept in. What if I hadn't slept through it? What if my memories of that night were incomplete or altered somehow? I'd been under tremendous stress preparing for final exams. I'd been taking medication for anxiety, pills that sometimes left me groggy and disoriented. What if I'd heard something and investigated, only to forget about it later? The psychology textbooks I'd been studying talked about dissociative episodes, about how the mind could protect itself from trauma by burying memories too painful to process. Could I have witnessed something that night, something so disturbing that my brain had locked it away? The possibility made me feel sick, but it also explained the gaps in my recollection, the way certain details felt fuzzy around the edges. I started having dreams about that night, vivid and unsettling. In them I would hear my sister calling for help, but when I tried to go to her, my legs wouldn't move. Sometimes I dreamed that I was watching from the hallway as someone entered her room, but the figure's face was always obscured by shadow. Other times I was the one opening her door, though I couldn't understand why. The dreams felt more real than my actual memories, which had begun to seem suspect and unreliable. Had I really been studying when she came home, or had I been somewhere else in the house? Had I actually heard her shoes drop by the door, or was that detail borrowed from countless other nights? The more I questioned, the less certain I became about anything. I decided to retrace my steps from that evening, hoping to jar loose some buried recollection. I sat at my desk with the psychology textbook open to the same chapter I'd been reading. I tried to remember exactly where I'd been when I heard her key in the lock, but even this simple exercise revealed inconsistencies. The textbook fell open to a page about memory suppression, not the chapter on behavioral conditioning I thought I'd been studying. And my notes from that night were missing from my notebook, leaving only blank pages where they should have been. The detective had asked me about my sister's state of mind, whether she'd seemed depressed or anxious. I told him she was fine, just tired from work and school, but now I wondered if I'd been protecting her privacy or protecting something else. Had she confided in me about her fears? Had she asked for help that I'd somehow forgotten giving or refusing? I found myself studying my own reflection in the bathroom mirror, searching for signs of deception or hidden knowledge. My face looked thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under my eyes that suggested I'd been losing sleep for longer than I realized. There was something in my expression that I didn't recognize, a wariness that seemed to go deeper than recent events. Going through my sister's belongings became an exercise in archaeology, each item potentially holding clues to a truth I was no longer sure I wanted to uncover. Her work uniform still smelled faintly of coffee and grease from the diner. Her nursing textbooks were filled with careful notes in her precise handwriting. But there were other things too. A door chain I didn't remember her installing, still in its packaging but opened as if she'd considered using it. A can of pepper spray tucked in her purse. A list of phone numbers written on a scrap of paper, none of which I recognized. The house itself seemed to be revealing secrets I'd overlooked, scratches around the lock on the back door that could have been from keys or from something else. A window in the basement that didn't latch properly, something I'd never noticed despite living here for over a year. Dust patterns on surfaces that suggested items had been moved and replaced, though I couldn't remember disturbing anything. I started wondering about the other tenants who'd lived here before us. The landlord had mentioned that the previous renter had left suddenly, breaking their lease without explanation. At the time, it had seemed like good fortune for us an available apartment in our price range. But now I wondered what had driven them away and whether the same threat had eventually found my sister. The neighborhood took on a different character as my perception shifted. Houses that had seemed friendly and well-maintained now looked like they could be hiding secrets. The man who walked his dog past our house every evening began to seem less like a harmless neighbor and more like someone conducting surveillance. Even the mail carrier, who'd always been pleasant and professional, started to feel suspect when I noticed how long he lingered at our mailbox. But the most disturbing realization was how little I actually knew about my own behavior during those weeks leading up to my sister's disappearance. I'd been so focused on school and my upcoming exams that entire days felt like a blur. I might have been sleepwalking through my life, unaware of threats gathering around us. Or worse, I might have been aware and done nothing to stop what happened. The medication I'd been taking for anxiety came with warnings about memory problems and confusion. I dismissed these side effects as minor inconveniences, but now they seemed more sinister. What if I'd witnessed my sister's abduction but been too impaired to help her? What if I'd even participated somehow, acting under the influence of chemicals that altered my judgment and erased my recollection? I stopped taking the pills and waited for my mind to clear, hoping that sobriety would bring back the missing pieces. Instead, I found myself more anxious than ever, jumping at every sound and seeing potential threats in every shadow. The house felt less like a home and more like a crime scene, every room holding evidence of something I couldn't quite grasp. The door to my sister's room became a focal point for my growing unease. I'd left it open after she disappeared, partly out of hope that she might return and partly because closing it felt like giving up. But now I began to suspect that someone else had been opening and closing it, using her room for purposes I didn't want to contemplate. Sometimes I'd find it positioned differently than I remembered, the gap between door and frame wider or narrower than before. Late at night, I would stand in the hallway and stare at that door, trying to will it to reveal its secrets. The darkness beyond seemed thick and purposeful, as if it were actively concealing something rather than simply marking the absence of light. I began to imagine I could see movement in that darkness, shapes that shifted and withdrew when I tried to focus on them. The shadow I'd seen that first night, the thin edge that had slipped into view beneath the door, haunted my thoughts. I'd convinced myself it was a trick of the light, but now I wondered if it had been someone's foot, someone who'd been hiding in my sister's room and listening to me breathe in the hallway. The thought made my skin crawl, but it also raised questions I didn't want to answer. If someone had been there, why hadn't they tried to hurt me too? What made me different from my sister? Unless I wasn't different, unless I was exactly what they'd been looking for all along. The possibility settled over me like a cold weight. What if my sister hadn't been the target? What if she'd simply been in the way of someone who wanted to get to me? Her journal entries about feeling watched, about things being moved in the house, what if those hadn't been threats directed at her, but warnings meant for me? I thought about the timing of her disappearance, how it had coincided with my final exams and the peak of my academic stress. Someone who'd been studying my routine would have known I was distracted and vulnerable. They might have planned to take me that night, only to find my sister in the way. In trying to protect me, she might have sacrificed herself. The guilt of this possibility was overwhelming, but it also explained things that had never made sense before. Why her purse and keys were never found, why there were no signs of struggle in her room. If she'd left willingly to draw danger away from me, she would have taken only what she needed and been careful not to wake me with sounds of a fight. But this theory raised its own troubling questions. If someone had wanted me badly enough to make my sister disappear, why hadn't they tried again? Why leave me alone in the house, unguarded and unsuspecting? Unless I wasn't as alone as I thought. Unless they were still here, still watching, still waiting for the right moment to finish what they'd started. The house around me seemed to pulse with hidden presence. Every creak of settling wood could be a footstep. Every whisper of wind through the walls might be someone breathing. I found myself holding my own breath for long minutes, listening for signs of life in places where no life should be. And sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, I thought I heard a rhythm that matched my own heartbeat, as if someone nearby was trying to synchronize their breathing with mine. The door across the room continues to creak softly, its hinge marking time like a metronome. I still don't know if the shadow I saw was real or imagined, if my sister left to protect me or was taken against her will, if the presence I feel in this house belongs to an intruder or to parts of my own mind I can no longer trust. What I do know is that standing here, frozen between certainty and doubt, I'm no longer sure which possibility frightens me more. Story 2. The morning sun filtered softly through the lace curtains, casting intricate patterns on the worn wooden floor. The air was filled with the musty scent of a room long undisturbed. A gentle breeze nudged an old rocking chair, setting it into a slow, rhythmic creak. Everything appeared untouched, except for a single sheet of paper fluttering on the table, a fresh smudge of ink trailing across its surface. As I stepped further in, the weight of secrets pressed heavier, as if the walls were eager to speak. That creaking sound, it follows me everywhere now, even when I'm nowhere near wooden floors or old furniture. Sometimes I wake up hearing it, that slow back and forth rhythm, like breathing, like waiting. I keep trying to remember why I went there in the first place. Was someone expecting me? The paper on the table, I should have read it first, shouldn't I? But I was drawn to other things, the way dust motes danced in those latticed shadows, the smell of something sweet underneath all that mustiness. Flowers, maybe, or perfume that had been sitting too long. My hands were shaking, I remember that clearly, not from fear exactly, more like recognition of something I couldn't quite place. There was a photograph on the mantelpiece, I'm almost certain of this. A woman's face, but every time I try to focus on her features, they slip away like water. She was smiling, I think, or maybe that was just the way the light hit the glass. The frame was silver, tarnished around the edges, heavy in my hands when I picked it up. Did I pick it up? Sometimes I remember just looking. Other times I see myself holding it, turning it over, searching for something written on the back. The rocking chair kept moving even after the breeze stopped. I noticed that. Such a small detail, but it lodged itself in my mind like a splinter. Back and forth, as if someone had just gotten up, as if they might come back any moment. I called out, "Hello." My voice sounded strange in that space, muffled and sharp at the same time. No answer, but I hadn't really expected one, had I? The paper was definitely there, white against the dark wood of the table. The ink smudge looked fresh, still slightly wet when I touched it. Blue-black, the kind that comes from a fountain pen. Who uses fountain pens anymore? Someone careful, someone who takes their time with words. But I can't remember what the words said. This is the part that bothers me most. I know I read it. I can see myself leaning over the table, squinting in that filtered sunlight, my lips moving slightly as I worked through each line. But the content, the meaning, it's gone. Like trying to remember a dream after you've been awake too long. There was a name at the bottom, a signature, looping and elegant, feminine, I thought, but when I try to picture those letters now, they blur together. The house felt occupied, not by anyone visible, but by presence, by habits worn into the floorboards and walls. I could sense routines, someone who sat in that rocking chair regularly, someone who placed flowers in the vase by the window, someone who wrote letters at that table. Someone who might still be there, just out of sight. I moved through other rooms. This part comes back in flashes. A kitchen with dishes in the sink, but were they clean or dirty? A bedroom with the covers pulled back, but was someone getting up or going to bed? Everything suggested recent life, but nothing confirmed it. The photographs were everywhere once I started noticing them, not just on the mantelpiece, tucked into mirror frames, propped against books, scattered across surfaces. Always the same woman, I think, but at different ages, or maybe different women who looked similar. Family resemblance can be strong in certain features, the eyes especially, the way they seem to follow movement. I kept coming back to that front room, to the rocking chair and the paper and the smell of flowers. The creaking had become constant now, a metronome keeping time with something I couldn't identify. My heartbeat maybe, or footsteps somewhere else in the house. The paper had moved, I'm sure of this. When I first entered, it was centered on the table. Now it was closer to the edge, as if someone had been reading over my shoulder and nudged it aside. But I was alone. I had to be alone. Didn't I? I tried to leave then. I remember walking toward the door, my hand on the brass knob, but something made me turn back. The creaking had stopped. Complete silence, which somehow felt worse than the constant rhythm, like holding your breath underwater. The woman in the photograph was definitely smiling now. Not the uncertain expression I'd noticed before, but something warmer, more knowing, as if we'd been introduced and I'd simply forgotten. Maybe we had been introduced. Maybe that's why I was there in the first place, why my hands knew to turn the doorknob without fumbling, why I hadn't been surprised by the unlocked entrance. The paper was gone. I stared at the empty table, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it, but the ink smudge was still there, a ghost impression of words I couldn't recall, evidence of something that had existed, even if I could no longer prove what. I sat in the rocking chair. I don't remember deciding to do this, but suddenly I was there, feeling the worn smoothness of the armrests, the gentle give of old springs. It fit me perfectly, as if it had been waiting. The room looked different from this angle, more intimate. The lace curtains framed the window like a picture, and I could see a garden beyond. Someone had been tending it recently. The flowers were the source of that sweet smell, drifting in with the breeze. The same breeze that had been moving the chair when I arrived. But there was no breeze now. The curtains hung still. Nothing moved except me, rocking slowly back and forth, back and forth. The motion felt natural, automatic, like muscle memory. Had I sat here before? The question opened something in my mind, a crack that let other possibilities seep in. The familiar weight of the photograph, the way my hand had found the light switch without searching, the reason I'd known to come here at all. Someone had been expecting me, someone who left a letter on the table and flowers by the window and a chair positioned just right to catch the morning sun. Someone who might have stepped away just before I arrived or just after. I closed my eyes and listened. The house had its own breathing, its own pulse, settling sounds and air moving through spaces I hadn't explored, but underneath that something else. Something that might have been footsteps, or might have been my own heartbeat, or might have been the echo of that rocking chair from some other morning when someone else had sat here waiting. When I opened my eyes, the photograph was face down on the mantelpiece. I hadn't heard it fall, I would have heard it fall. But there it was, the silver frame catching the light, the image hidden against the wood. I stood up to write it, but my legs felt unsteady, as if I'd been sitting much longer than I'd realized. The back of the photograph had writing on it, faded ink but still legible. A message I should have been able to read, should have been able to understand. But the words seemed to rearrange themselves as I looked, becoming less clear rather than more. Like the letter, like everything in this place that should have made sense but didn't. I put the photograph back the way I'd found it, face up, smiling, watching the room with those familiar eyes. Then I returned to the rocking chair because leaving felt impossible now, because something was unfinished. The sun had moved. The lace patterns on the floor were different, shorter, suggesting more time had passed than I'd accounted for. But time felt elastic here, unreliable. I might have been sitting for minutes or hours. The sweet flower smell was stronger now, almost overwhelming, like walking into a greenhouse or a funeral home, too much beauty concentrated in one space. I started to remember other visits, not clearly, not in order, but in fragments that felt true. Sitting in this same chair, reading letters that dissolved from memory as soon as I finished them. Waiting for someone who always seemed to have just left or was just about to arrive. The woman in the photograph, I knew her face now, knew it the way you know your own reflection. But I couldn't place her in my life, couldn't remember how we'd met or why I kept coming back to this place. Maybe she was the one who'd been rocking in this chair before I arrived. Maybe she was still here, just out of phase, like a radio station you can almost but not quite tune in. The paper reappeared while I wasn't looking. One moment the table was empty, the next it held that familiar white rectangle with its trailing smudge of ink. But this time there were more words, as if someone had been writing while I sat there remembering. I approached carefully, afraid the letters would vanish again if I moved too quickly. The handwriting was the same elegant script, but the message was different, or maybe I was reading it differently. Maybe I was finally ready to understand. It was an invitation, or an explanation, or both. The signature at the bottom was mine. I stared at my own handwriting, my own name looped in blue-black ink. When had I written this? Why couldn't I remember? The words above the signature were instructions, or maybe a confession. They seemed important, urgent, but they kept slipping away from comprehension like everything else in this place. The rocking chair was moving again. I could hear it creaking behind me, keeping that same patient rhythm. But I was standing at the table. No one was sitting in the chair. No one visible. I turned around slowly, half expecting to see myself still sitting there, caught in some loop of memory and repetition. But the chair was empty, rocking gently in sunlight that seemed too bright now, too warm. The photograph had multiplied, not just the one on the mantelpiece, but dozens scattered across every surface. All the same woman, all the same knowing smile, all watching me with recognition I couldn't return. Or maybe I could return it, and that was the problem. I picked up the letter, my letter, and tried to read it aloud. Maybe hearing the words would make them stick, but my voice caught on syllables that should have been familiar, stumbled over meanings that danced just beyond reach. The only thing that came through clearly was the date at the top of the page, today's date, written in my handwriting in ink that was still wet. But I didn't remember writing it. I didn't remember coming here today, or yesterday, or any of the other days that were starting to blur together in my mind. I only remembered this moment, this eternal present of discovery and forgetting. The creaking was all around me now, not just from the rocking chair, but from the floorboards, the walls, the very structure of the house responding to weight and movement I couldn't see. Like the building itself was rocking, swaying gently back and forth. Like being held. I sat down again because standing felt too exposed, too vulnerable. The chair welcomed me back with familiar comfort, adjusting to my shape as if we'd done this dance many times before. Maybe we had, maybe this was what I did now, what I'd always done. Come to this place, read letters I'd written to myself, sit in a chair that might have been mine all along, surrounded by photographs of someone I should remember but couldn't quite place. The woman in the pictures was aging backwards as I looked at them. Or maybe I was seeing them in reverse order, watching a life unfold in the wrong direction. Young woman, middle-aged, elderly, or elderly, middle-aged, young. Time moved strangely here. Like everything else. I closed my eyes and let the rocking motion carry me, back and forth, back and forth. The rhythm was soothing now, hypnotic. I could feel myself sinking into it, becoming part of it. When I opened my eyes, the room was different, or I was different. The light had changed again, softer now, more golden, evening light instead of morning, but that couldn't be right. I just arrived. Hadn't I? The letter was in my hand. I didn't remember picking it up, but there it was, creased from folding and unfolding. My handwriting, my words, my signature, a message from myself to myself, explaining something I'd forgotten or chosen not to remember. I began to read. and this time the words held their meaning long enough for me to understand. I was the woman in the photographs. This was my house, my chair, my letter. I'd been coming here not as a visitor, but as someone returning home. Someone who'd lost pieces of herself along the way and had to keep rediscovering them over and over. The creaking wasn't the sound of an empty chair moved by wind. It was the sound of me, rocking gently as I tried to remember who I was, why I was here, what I was supposed to do next. The letter explained some of it, written in my clearer moments when the fog lifted enough for me to see the pattern. Instructions for the next time I found myself standing in this doorway, confused and searching. But even as I read, I could feel the understanding starting to slip away. The words becoming uncertain again, the meaning dissolving like sugar in water. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back on the table. Someone would need it later. Someone who looked like me, who had my voice and my handwriting but not my memories. Someone who would sit in this rocking chair and try to piece together fragments of a life that kept scattering like leaves in wind. The sun was setting now, painting the lace curtains gold and amber. Soon it would be dark, and I would have to decide whether to stay or go, whether to sleep in the bedroom upstairs or find my way back to wherever I'd come from. But I probably wouldn't remember making that decision. Tomorrow or the next day or whenever I next found myself standing in this doorway, it would all be new again. The mysterious letter, the moving chair, the photographs of a woman I almost recognized. The creaking would start up again, patient and persistent, back and forth, keeping time with something I couldn't quite recall but couldn't entirely forget. Like a heartbeat, like breathing, like the sound of someone rocking gently in an old chair, waiting for memory to return. Story 3. It flickered in the corner of my eye, a persistent dance of light that shouldn't be here. My heart quickened, each beat a reminder of the anomaly that drew me inward. The desk lamp beside me was steady, yet that elusive flicker taunted my peripheral vision, bringing a chill to the comfortable warmth of the room. I turned, expecting to find an errant reflection, a trick of glass or shadow, but nothing justified its presence. The sensation was familiar and unsettling, like touching a scar you can't remember getting. I leaned forward, chasing the flicker to where it thrummed at the edge of reason. I hadn't seen this since the last time when everything unraveled. I know what happened that night. I've told this story so many times that it's become smooth as river stone, polished by repetition until every detail gleams with certainty. She was there in the kitchen, washing dishes after dinner. The sound of running water, the gentle clink of plates against the porcelain sink. I was reading in the living room, my back to the kitchen doorway, absorbed in a book about forensic psychology. The irony wasn't lost on me then, and it isn't now. The argument started over something trivial. Money, I think, or maybe it was about her sister's upcoming visit. These details matter less than what came after. Her voice rose first, cutting through the domestic quiet like a blade through silk. I set my book down, spine up on the coffee table, the pages splayed open to a chapter about memory and trauma. How fitting. I walked to the kitchen doorway and stood there, watching her hands move in the soapy water. She was scrubbing a wine glass with unusual force, her shoulders tense beneath her blue sweater, the sweater I'd bought her for her birthday. When she turned to face me, her eyes held that familiar mixture of frustration and something else, something I chose not to recognize at the time. The conversation escalated. She accused me of being distant, of living in my head instead of in our life together. I defended myself with the cool logic I'd always relied on, explaining that my work required concentration, that I was under pressure to finish my research. She laughed, but not with humor. The sound was sharp and bitter, like glass breaking. Then she left, walked out the front door with nothing but her purse and car keys, leaving the kitchen light on and the wine glass half washed in the sink. I heard her car start in the driveway, heard the tires on the gravel as she pulled away. I finished washing the glass myself, dried it, and put it back in the cabinet. Then I returned to my book. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. But now, sitting here in my study with that strange flicker at the edge of my vision, I find myself questioning details I've never questioned before. Small things, insignificant things that suddenly feel heavy with meaning. The wine glass, for instance. Why was she washing a wine glass when we'd only had coffee with dinner? I remember the coffee clearly, remember pouring it from the blue ceramic pot into our matching mugs. Her mug had a small chip on the handle that she always positioned away from her grip, but a wine glass. I closed my eyes and tried to reconstruct the evening. The kitchen light was on, yes, but was it the overhead fluorescent or the smaller light above the sink? Memory is a tricky thing, I know this from my research. It's not a recording device, but a reconstruction, each recollection influenced by emotion, expectation, and time. Yet I've always prided myself on my observational skills, my attention to detail. The flicker catches my attention again, stronger now, more insistent. I turn toward it, but it vanishes, leaving only the steady glow of my desk lamp and the faint reflection in the window glass. Outside, the neighborhood is quiet, streetlights casting familiar shadows across the front yard. The same yard where they found her car 3 days later, parked neatly in the driveway as if she'd simply come home. But she hadn't come home, at least not in any way that mattered. I lean back in my chair and feel the leather creak beneath me. This chair, this desk, this room where I've spent countless hours working on my research into criminal psychology and victim behavior. The irony isn't lost on me that I became an expert in the very field that would later dissect my own life. The police questioned me, of course, standard procedure when a spouse disappears. I answered their questions with the same methodical precision I brought to my academic work. Yes, we'd argued. No, it wasn't unusual for her to leave after an argument. Yes, she'd done it before, usually staying with her sister across town for a night or two before returning. No, I hadn't tried to contact her immediately. I'd assumed she needed space. The detective who interviewed me was a woman with graying hair and tired eyes. She took notes in a small spiral notebook, her handwriting cramped and efficient. She asked about our relationship, about any recent changes in behavior, about finances and friends and family. I answered everything truthfully, or so I believed at the time. But memory is a living thing, changing and evolving with each recall. And sitting here now, with that persistent flicker dancing at the periphery of my consciousness, I'm beginning to wonder if truth is as fixed as I once believed. The wine glass bothers me more than it should. Such a small detail, yet it feels like a thread that, if pulled, might unravel everything else. I get up from my chair and walk to the kitchen, my footsteps echoing in the quiet house. The overhead light flickers once before settling into its usual steady glow. Another electrical issue to add to the growing list of repairs this old house demands. I open the cabinet and look at our glasses, lined up in neat rows. The wine glasses are on the top shelf, 6 of them all present and accounted for. But as I stare at them, I notice something I've never noticed before. One glass is slightly different from the others, its bowl a fraction smaller, its stem a millimeter thicker, not part of the original set. When did we get that glass? I can't remember. It's been there so long it's become invisible, part of the landscape of our shared domestic life. But now it seems significant, a puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit the picture I've been constructing all this time. I reach up and take it down, holding it up to the light. The glass is clean, spotless, but as I turn it in my hands, I catch a faint scent, something floral and familiar. Her perfume, perhaps, though that seems impossible after all this time. The flicker returns, stronger now, and I realize it's not coming from the corner of my eye at all. It's coming from the glass itself, from the way the kitchen light refracts through its surface. I set it down on the counter and step back, my pulse quickening. This is when the certainty begins to crack, when the story I've told myself and others starts to show its flaws. Because if she was washing this glass that night, the glass that doesn't match the others, then what was in it? And why can't I remember? I return to my study, leaving the glass on the kitchen counter like evidence at a crime scene. My book is still open on the coffee table, the pages yellowed now with age. I pick it up and read the chapter title, Confabulation and False Memory in Trauma Survivors. The words blur slightly as I read, and I realize my hands are shaking. Confabulation, the unconscious creation of false memories to fill gaps in recollection. It's a defense mechanism, a way for the mind to create coherence where none exists. I've studied it extensively, written papers about it, presented my findings at conferences, but I never considered that I might be subject to it myself. What if the argument wasn't about money or her sister's visit? What if it was about something else entirely, something my mind has chosen to forget or reshape into something more palatable? I close the book and set it aside, then lean forward and put my head in my hands. The flicker is constant now, a persistent pulse of light that seems to emanate from inside my skull. I press my palms against my eyes and try to remember, really remember, what happened that night. The kitchen, the sound of running water, her blue sweater. But now, as I focus on these details, they seem less solid, less certain. Was it really a blue sweater, or am I thinking of the one she wore the day before? Was it running water, or was it something else entirely? I stand up and walk to the window, looking out at the driveway where they found her car. The gravel is undisturbed now, weeds growing up through the spaces between stones. But I can still see the tire tracks in my mind, the way the car was positioned perfectly between the painted lines I'd made to help her park straight. Too perfectly, perhaps, as if someone had been very careful about the positioning. The thought comes unbidden, unwelcome. I push it away, but it returns with greater force. Who else had access to her car keys? Who else knew her habits well enough to park the car exactly as she would have? The detective had asked me these same questions, and I'd answered them with confidence. No one else had keys. She was particular about her car, protective of it. She wouldn't have let anyone else drive it, certainly wouldn't have given anyone else access to the keys. But as I stand here staring out at the driveway, I remember something else. Something I'd forgotten or chosen not to remember. The spare key, hidden in a magnetic box under the rear wheel well. We put it there after she locked herself out one afternoon, a precaution against future mishaps. I'd forgotten about that key entirely until this moment. How could I have forgotten something so important? And if I forgot about the key, what else might I have forgotten? The flicker intensifies, and I realize it's not just light anymore. It's memory, fragmented and shifting, trying to surface through layers of time and self-protection. I see flashes of that night, but they're different now, viewed through a lens I hadn't known existed. The kitchen, yes, but darker than I remembered. Not the cheerful domestic scene I'd constructed, but something else. Something that makes my chest tighten with an emotion I can't quite name. Her voice, but not raised in argument, lower, more controlled. The tone she used when she was truly angry, not just frustrated. The tone that meant she'd made a decision, reached some kind of conclusion. And my own voice responding not with cool logic, but with something else. Something desperate and pleading that doesn't match the composed academic I've always believed myself to be. I back away from the window, my reflection ghost-like in the glass. Who is that person staring back at me? I know the face, of course, but there's something in the eyes I don't recognize. Something that suggests the capacity for actions I've never admitted to myself. The wine glass calls to me from the kitchen, a silent witness to events I'm only now beginning to remember. I walk back to the counter and pick it up again, holding it carefully as if it might shatter at any moment. The scent is stronger now, more complex. Not just her perfume, but something else underneath it. Something metallic and organic that makes my stomach clench with recognition and revulsion. I set the glass down quickly and step back, my heart hammering against my ribs. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. The story I know, the story I've told, that's the truth. It has to be. But the flicker won't stop and the memories keep coming, each one more vivid and disturbing than the last. I see myself in the kitchen that night, but I'm not reading in the living room. I'm there in the kitchen, and my hands are shaking as I reach for something on the counter. The wine glass, the strange wine glass that doesn't match the others. And she's there too, but not washing dishes. She's facing me, her back against the sink, and her eyes are wide with something I don't want to recognize. Fear, yes, but also a terrible understanding. She knows something, has discovered something, and she's confronting me with it. The argument isn't about money or her sister's visit. It's about the research, about the files I keep locked in my desk drawer, about the photographs and newspaper clippings and detailed notes about cases that hit too close to home. She's found them, hasn't she? Found the evidence of my obsession, my fascination with the very crimes I claim to study objectively. She's seen the pattern I thought I'd hidden so well, the connection between my research and the unsolved cases that have plagued our quiet community. "You're sick," she says, and her voice is steady despite the fear in her eyes. I should have seen it before, but I made excuses. I told myself you were just thorough, just dedicated to your work, but this isn't research. This is something else entirely. I tried to explain, tried to make her understand that I'm not what she thinks I am, but the words come out wrong, defensive, and desperate. And all the while, the wine glass sits between us on the counter, half full of the Merlot she'd poured to calm her nerves before confronting me. The glass that would later need to be washed, cleaned of any evidence of what came next. I'm back in my study now, though I don't remember walking here. The flicker has become a strobe, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. I sit down heavily in my chair and stare at my desk, at the locked drawer that holds my real research. The drawer she'd somehow managed to open that night. The drawer that contained not just academic papers and theoretical frameworks, but something much more personal and damning. My hands move of their own accord, reaching for the key I keep taped to the underside of the desk. The drawer slides open with a soft whisper, revealing the files I haven't looked at since that night. Photographs of crime scenes, detailed maps of locations, behavioral analysis charts that go far beyond anything required for legitimate research. And at the bottom of the drawer, wrapped in a plastic bag, a small digital camera. The kind used for surveillance, for documenting things that were never meant to be documented. I don't want to look at the camera, don't want to see what might be stored on its memory card, but my hands are already unwrapping it, already pressing the power button. The LCD screen flickers to life, and I'm confronted with images I'd convinced myself didn't exist. Her in our kitchen, her face pale and determined as she confronts me with her discovery. Me reaching for the wine glass, my expression twisted with an emotion I don't recognize as my own. The struggle that followed, brief and terrible and final. And after the careful staging, the dishes in the sink, the kitchen light left on, the car moved from the garage to the driveway, positioned exactly as she would have parked it. The performance of normalcy, of a simple domestic argument followed by a temporary departure. I'd been so careful, so methodical, but I'd forgotten about the camera, forgotten that I'd been documenting everything, treating even this as another case study to be analyzed and understood. The flicker stops suddenly, leaving me in the steady glow of my desk lamp. The silence is deafening, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. I look at the camera in my hands, at the evidence of what I've become, and I understand finally why the truth has been so elusive. Because the truth is that I'm not the grieving husband I've pretended to be. I'm not even the detached academic observer I've always believed myself to be. I'm something else entirely, something that has been hiding behind a carefully constructed facade of normalcy and respectability. But even now, even with the evidence literally in my hands, I can't quite accept it completely. Part of me still insists that this is all a misunderstanding, a trick of memory and guilt and the stress of living under suspicion for so long. Because if I accept it, if I acknowledge what these images show, then I have to accept that everything I've believed about myself is a lie. I have to accept that I'm not the victim of circumstances or the subject of an unfair investigation. I have to accept that I'm exactly what she said I was that night. The camera slips from my fingers and clatters to the floor. The sound echoes through the quiet house, through the rooms where we once lived together, where I now live alone with my secrets and my carefully maintained deceptions. I lean back in my chair and close my eyes, but the flicker returns immediately, stronger than ever. And I realize it's not going to stop, not ever. It's going to follow me wherever I go, a persistent reminder of the truth I can neither fully accept nor completely deny. Because even now, even knowing what I know, I can't be certain where the real memories end and the confabulation begins. I can't be sure which version of events is true, and which is the story my mind has created to protect me from something too terrible to acknowledge. All I know is that she's gone and I'm still here, and somewhere between those two facts lies a truth that may be too dangerous to ever fully uncover. The flicker pulses once more, then fades to a barely perceptible glow at the edge of my vision, waiting, watching, ready to return whenever I'm foolish enough to believe I've finally figured it all out. Story 4. The pattern in the details. It wasn't unusual for the garage door to be ajar in the mornings. The latch was old, prone to sticking on humid nights, and nobody ever complained. The lawn chairs were always rearranged in a pattern that seemed deliberate but could easily be blamed on the wind. I noticed the garden hose coiled too neatly for our usual routine, its surface dry despite last night's rain. The fence gate creaked in that same familiar way, as if greeting an old friend. I kept the porch lights off. They never seemed to deter anyone anyway. But that morning felt different. The air carried a metallic taste that lingered on my tongue as I stepped outside to collect the newspaper. My bare feet touched something wet on the concrete step, though the rest of the porch remained bone dry. When I looked down, the dark stain had already begun to fade, leaving only a faint outline that could have been anything. I worked as a records clerk at the courthouse, a job that taught me to notice inconsistencies, small details that didn't align, signatures that seemed forced, dates that didn't match up with testimonies. These skills had become second nature, bleeding into every aspect of my daily life. So when my neighbor across the street started leaving her kitchen light on all night, I paid attention. She had lived there for nearly a decade, a quiet woman who kept her lawn immaculate and her curtains drawn. We exchanged polite waves when our paths crossed, but never more than that. Her routine was predictable. Kitchen light off by 9, bedroom light on by 9:15, complete darkness by 10. The consistency was almost comforting in its reliability. The change started subtly. First, the kitchen light stayed on until 10:30, then 11. Within a few weeks, it burned through the entire night, casting long shadows across her front yard that shifted with the wind like restless spirits. I told myself it was none of my business. People change their habits. Maybe she was having trouble sleeping. Maybe she was afraid of something. The morning I found the wet spot on my porch, I decided to pay closer attention. During my lunch break, I walked past her house on the pretense of checking the community mailbox. The front door was painted a deep blue that seemed freshly touched up, though I couldn't remember it looking faded before. The mailbox flag was down, but I could see envelopes stuffed inside, some of them yellowing at the edges. A newspaper still wrapped in plastic sat on her walkway, its date stamped from 3 days ago. I knocked on her door. The sound echoed hollow, as if the house was mostly empty. After a long moment, I heard footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. The door opened just wide enough for me to see half her face. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. "I wanted to check if everything was okay," I said. "I noticed your light's been on at night." Her smile was thin, practiced. "Just having some trouble sleeping. Thank you for asking. If you need anything, I'm right across the street." "I appreciate that, really." The door closed with a soft click, followed by the distinct sound of multiple locks turning. I counted 4 separate mechanisms engaging before her footsteps retreated into the house. That evening, I positioned myself by my living room window with a cup of tea and a book I had no intention of reading. The kitchen light across the street flickered on as darkness settled over the neighborhood. Through the thin curtains, I could make out her silhouette moving back and forth, pacing in a pattern that seemed almost ritualistic. Around midnight, a car pulled up to her curb. The headlights cut through the darkness for a moment before shutting off, leaving only the ambient glow from the street lamp. A figure emerged from the driver's side, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the confidence of someone familiar with the space. They walked directly to her front door without hesitation, producing a key that turned smoothly in the lock. The kitchen light went out immediately. I pressed closer to the window, my breath fogging the glass. The house across the street had become completely dark for the first time in weeks. I waited, watching, but saw no further movement. The car remained parked at the curb, its engine ticking as it cooled. The next morning, the vehicle was gone. My neighbor's routine had returned to its original pattern: kitchen light off, bedroom light off, complete silence. But something about her posture seemed different when she emerged to collect her mail. She moved more carefully, as if every step required conscious thought. I began documenting these observations in a small notebook I kept in my kitchen drawer. Times, descriptions, patterns, the same methodical approach I used for case files at work. What I discovered was troubling in its inconsistency. The mysterious car appeared irregularly, sometimes twice in 1 week, sometimes not for 2 weeks straight. but it always arrived after midnight, and the house always went dark immediately afterward. On the nights when no car came, the kitchen light burned until dawn, and my neighbors' pacing shadows continued their restless dance. I started researching property records during my breaks at work. The house had been purchased 8 years ago by a woman whose name I recognized from various legal documents that had crossed my desk. Divorce proceedings, restraining orders, a pattern of legal actions that painted a picture of someone trying to escape a dangerous situation. The restraining order was particularly illuminating. Filed against a man described as her former spouse, it detailed incidents of stalking, harassment, and threats. The order had been granted, but like many such documents I had processed, it was just paper, legal protection that existed only in theory. I began to understand why she kept her lights on, why she had installed multiple locks on her door, why she looked over her shoulder when collecting her mail. She was afraid, and based on what I was witnessing, her fear was justified. The breakthrough came during a particularly humid night when sleep eluded me completely. I had positioned myself by the window out of habit, watching the familiar glow from her kitchen. The mysterious car arrived earlier than usual, around 11:30, but this time the driver didn't go directly to the house. Instead, the figure walked around the perimeter of her property, testing windows, checking doors, moving with the systematic thoroughness of someone conducting surveillance. When they finally approached the front door, they didn't use a key. They knocked softly, a rhythmic pattern that seemed like a code. The kitchen light went out, but this time I saw her silhouette move to the front window. She peered through the curtains for a long moment before the door opened. The conversation that followed was brief, conducted in whispers I couldn't hear from across the street. Then both figures disappeared inside. I waited for over an hour, but neither person emerged. The house remained dark and silent. The next morning, I noticed fresh scratches around her front door lock. The kind of marks left by someone who had been drinking or was working in poor light, or someone who was using unfamiliar tools. During my lunch break, I walked past her house again. This time I could hear voices coming from inside, a man's voice raised in anger, followed by her voice pleading. The sounds were muffled by the walls, but the emotional content was unmistakable. This was not a friendly conversation. I stood on the sidewalk, uncertain about what to do. Calling the police seemed premature based on raised voices alone, but every instinct told me something was wrong. As I debated my options, the front door opened. The man who emerged was exactly as I had imagined. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of aggressive confidence that made smaller people step aside. He walked to his car without acknowledging my presence, but I could feel his awareness of me like a physical weight. The engine started with a roar that seemed intentionally loud, a display of power and intimidation. After he drove away, I knocked on her door. It took several minutes before she answered, and when she did, I could see the evidence of their confrontation. Her lip was slightly swollen, and she held herself carefully, as if movement caused pain. "Are you all right?" I asked. "I'm fine," she replied automatically, but her voice was shaky. "I heard shouting. Just a disagreement, nothing serious. I know about the restraining order." Her eyes widened with a mixture of fear and surprise. "How do you know about that?" "I work at the courthouse. I process these documents every day." I kept my voice gentle, non-threatening. "I also know how often they're violated." She looked past me toward the street, as if expecting the car to return. "He says the order doesn't matter anymore. says we're working things out. Are you? The question hung between us for a long moment. When she finally answered, her voice was barely a whisper. I don't know how to make him stop. That conversation changed everything. What had been curiosity and concern became something more urgent. I was no longer just an observer. I had become a confidant, and with that came responsibility. Over the following days, she began to share more details about her situation. Her former husband had been escalating his behavior for months. The late-night visits, the phone calls where he said nothing but breathed heavily into the receiver, the gifts left on her doorstep that felt more like threats than gestures of affection. She had tried changing her locks, but he always seemed to find a way inside. She suspected he had made copies of her keys during their marriage, but proving that would be impossible. The police had been polite but ultimately unhelpful. Without evidence of active violence, they could do little more than file reports. He's careful, she told me during one of our conversations. He knows exactly how far he can push without crossing legal lines, at least the lines that matter to law enforcement. I began researching similar cases in our jurisdiction, using my access to court records to identify patterns. What I found was disturbing but not surprising. Restraining orders were violated regularly, but prosecutions were rare. The burden of proof was high, and many victims were too frightened or exhausted to pursue legal action. But I also found something else. In 3 cases over the past 5 years, women with similar restraining orders had simply disappeared. Not dramatic disappearances that made headlines, but quiet vanishings. They stopped showing up to work, stopped paying bills, stopped existing in any official capacity. In each case, the former spouse claimed ignorance about their whereabouts, suggested they had left voluntarily, perhaps to start over somewhere else. Without evidence of foul play, the investigations had been perfunctory at best. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to look for it, but apparently few people were willing to look. I shared my findings with my neighbor, hoping the information might convince her to take additional precautions. Instead, it seemed to paralyze her with fear. The kitchen light began burning even brighter, and her pacing became more frantic. She started jumping at every sound, every shadow. "Maybe I should just leave," she said during one of our conversations. "Pack up and move somewhere he can't find me. That might be the safest option. But what if he follows me? What if running just makes him more angry?" These were questions I couldn't answer. Every choice seemed to carry enormous risk, and the legal system that was supposed to protect her had already proven inadequate. The crisis came on a night when the humidity was so thick it felt like breathing through wet cloth. I had fallen asleep in my chair by the window, the notebook of observations open on my lap. I woke to the sound of breaking glass. Across the street, her kitchen light was on, but something was wrong with the quality of the illumination. It flickered erratically, as if the fixture had been damaged. Through the window, I could see 2 silhouettes struggling, one much larger than the other. I grabbed my phone and dialed emergency services while running toward her house. The front door was standing open, hanging crooked on its hinges as if it had been forced. From inside came the sounds of a violent confrontation, furniture overturning, glass breaking, voices raised in anger and fear. By the time the police arrived, the house had gone silent. The officers approached cautiously, calling out announcements of their presence. I waited on the sidewalk, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. They found her in the kitchen, unconscious but alive, surrounded by the debris of her destroyed home. There was no sign of her attacker, but his car was parked around the corner, abandoned with the keys still in the ignition. The investigation that followed was thorough, but ultimately inconclusive. Her former husband had an alibi for the time of the attack, provided by coworkers who swore he had been with them at a bar across town. The physical evidence was ambiguous: fingerprints that could have been left during any of his previous visits, DNA that proved nothing more than his presence in a house where he had once lived. She recovered from her physical injuries, but the psychological damage was more lasting. She moved away shortly after being released from the hospital, leaving no forwarding address. The house across the street stood empty for months, its windows dark and its lawn growing wild. I continued documenting everything I had observed, adding new details as I remembered them. The notebook grew thick with observations, theories, connections that might have been meaningful or might have been the product of an overactive imagination. But I kept thinking about those other women who had disappeared, about the pattern that seemed so clear to me but had been invisible to official investigations, about the careful way her former husband had operated, always staying just within legal boundaries until the night when he hadn't. The case was eventually closed without charges being filed. Insufficient evidence, the prosecutor's office said. No clear proof of who had committed the assault. The victim's departure from the jurisdiction made prosecution even more difficult. I still live in the same house, still work at the courthouse processing legal documents, but now I pay closer attention to the restraining orders that cross my desk. I look for patterns, for names that appear multiple times, for cases that seem to follow familiar trajectories. Sometimes I drive past the house where she used to live. New tenants moved in eventually, a young couple who keep the lights on normal schedules and don't pace in their kitchen after midnight. They seem happy, unaware of the history contained within those walls. But I remember the wet spot on my porch that morning, which I now believe was blood. I remember the careful way her attacker moved around her property, testing her defenses. I remember the sound of breaking glass and the silence that followed. Most of all, I remember the way the system failed her, how paper protection proved meaningless against flesh and blood determination, how patterns that seemed obvious to me remained invisible to those with the power to act. She contacted me once, months after she had moved away. A brief phone call to let me know she was safe, that she had found somewhere to start over. She thanked me for caring, for trying to help, for being the only person who seemed to understand what she was going through. But she also told me something else. Her former husband had been asking questions about her whereabouts, making calls to mutual acquaintances, driving through neighborhoods where she used to live. The distance she had put between them hadn't diminished his obsession. It had only made him more creative in pursuing it. "I don't think this will ever really be over," she said before hanging up. I think about that conversation often, especially when I'm processing new restraining orders at work. Each document represents someone's desperate attempt to create safety through legal means, but I know how fragile that protection really is, how easily it can be circumvented by someone with sufficient motivation and patience. The notebook sits in my kitchen drawer, filled with observations that tell a story no one else seems willing to read. Evidence of a crime that was never officially solved, committed by someone who learned exactly how to exploit the gaps in our system of justice. And somewhere out there, he's still looking for her, still believing that she belongs to him, still waiting for the right moment to finish what he started that humid night when the sound of breaking glass shattered more than just windows. The pattern continues, and I keep watching, keep documenting, keep hoping that someday the details I've preserved might matter to someone with the power to act. But until then, I live with the knowledge of what I witnessed and the weight of what I couldn't prevent. The truth is out there, recorded in careful handwriting in a notebook that no one else will ever read. And that might have to be enough. Story 5. It started with a picture frame on my desk, always perfectly aligned with the edge. Each morning my hand brushed past it to retrieve a pen, and I'd adjust it back to its precise position without a second thought. Lately, though, the frame has refused to stay where I left it. At first it was just slightly off, a degree or two, nothing unusual. But soon it began to shift more noticeably, as if it had a mind of its own. This morning it hadn't moved at all. Yet when I walked away and returned, it was misaligned again. And now I can't help but wonder what else in the room is changing when I'm not looking. The photograph inside shows a stretch of coastline, waves frozen mid-crash against dark rocks. I bought it at a gallery exhibition, drawn to something indefinable in the composition. The photographer had captured that moment when water meets stone with such precision that I could almost hear the sound. But photographs lie, don't they? They show us one fraction of a second and ask us to believe it represents something larger, something true. I remember when the suspicion first took root, though memory is unreliable too. It might have been the way the cleaning service left things slightly rearranged, or how my coffee cup appeared on the wrong side of the desk one afternoon. Small disturbances that could mean nothing or everything. The mind seeks patterns where none exist, creates conspiracies from coincidence. The frame contains more than just that seascape. Tucked behind the photograph, pressed against the backing, is a business card I found wedged under my office door. No name, just a phone number and an address near the Harbor District. The card stock feels expensive between my fingers, heavier than standard paper. Someone wanted me to have it, but who? And why slip it under the door like a secret? I've called the number 3 times. The first time, it rang endlessly with no answer. The second, a voice picked up but said nothing, just breathing on the other end until I hung up. The third time, the line was disconnected. Each attempt felt like stepping deeper into something I didn't understand, something that had been waiting for me to notice. The address leads to a warehouse that overlooks the shipping channel. I've driven past it twice now, never stopping, just observing from my car as cargo vessels navigate the narrow waterway. The building appears abandoned, windows dark, but there's a quality to its stillness that suggests watchfulness, as if the structure itself is holding its breath. My office sits on the 14th floor, high enough to see the harbor in the distance. On clear afternoons, sunlight catches the water and throws it back in fragments, 1,000 mirrors reflecting something I can't quite grasp. I find myself staring out there more often now, losing track of time, wondering what moves beneath the surface where eyes can't follow. The frame shifts again while I'm looking away. This time it's rotated a full 90 degrees, the seascape now vertical instead of horizontal. The waves appear to be falling rather than breaking, gravity pulling them down into an abyss. I adjust it back to horizontal, but my hands are trembling slightly. When did that start? There's a pattern to the disturbances, I'm certain of it now. They happen most frequently on foggy mornings when the harbor disappears behind a gray veil. The frame moves, papers get shuffled, my desk lamp tilts at an angle I never set. Someone has access to this space, someone who knows my routines well enough to work around them. The building's security footage shows nothing unusual. I've reviewed hours of hallway recordings, searching for unfamiliar faces, but the cameras capture only the expected parade of office workers and maintenance staff. Yet the footage feels incomplete somehow, as if certain moments have been carefully edited out. The timestamp jumps occasionally, just a few seconds here and there, barely noticeable unless you're looking for gaps. I've started staying later, pretending to work while actually watching the reflection in my computer screen. The office behind me appears normal, static, but reflections distort reality. They show us reversed worlds where left becomes right, where familiar spaces transform into something alien. In the screen's dark surface, I sometimes glimpse movement that shouldn't be there. The photograph in the frame was taken at dawn, judging by the light quality. I know this because I've studied it obsessively, memorizing every detail. The waves carry foam that resembles faces in profile, and the rocks form shapes that shift meaning depending on how long you stare. Is that a figure standing in the spray, or just shadow and mist playing tricks on perception? My apartment overlooks the same harbor visible from my office, though from a different angle. At night, I stand at the window and watch lights move across the water, ships arriving and departing according to schedules I don't understand. Sometimes a vessel will anchor in the channel for hours, dark and silent, before continuing its journey. What cargo do they carry? What business brings them to our waters under cover of darkness? The business card has begun to feel warm in my wallet, as if it's absorbing heat from my body. The ink seems to shift color depending on the lighting, sometimes appearing black, sometimes deep blue like ocean water. I've memorized the phone number, but when I dial it now, I hear only the sound of waves breaking against stone, rhythmic and endless. Sleep comes in fragments now. I wake at odd hours with the sensation that someone has just left the room, the air still disturbed by their passage. The frame on my bedside table, a smaller version of the one at work, never moves during these nocturnal visits. It's as if whoever enters knows I'm watching, even with my eyes closed. The warehouse address has become a compulsion. I drive there without planning to, my car navigating the route automatically while my conscious mind focuses elsewhere. The building grows more familiar with each visit, its broken windows and rusted fire escapes mapping themselves into my memory. I've never seen anyone enter or leave, yet I'm convinced the structure isn't empty. My reflection in the office window has started to look unfamiliar. Not dramatically different, just subtly wrong, like a photograph that's been slightly altered. My eyes seem darker, my expression more guarded, or perhaps I'm simply seeing myself clearly for the first time, recognizing something that was always there, but hidden beneath layers of routine and assumption. The frame moved again while I was writing these words. This time it's facing away from me entirely, showing only the brown backing and metal clasps. The photograph of the seascape is hidden now, but I can still hear the waves breaking against those dark rocks, a sound that might be memory or might be something else entirely. I understand now that the mystery was never about who moves the frame or why. It was about recognition, about accepting that some disturbances can't be explained or stopped, only acknowledged. The photograph shows a moment of collision between water and stone, between the fluid and the fixed, captured in perfect, impossible stillness. The business card has disappeared from my wallet, though I don't remember removing it. Perhaps it was never real, just another trick of perception in a world where nothing stays exactly where you left it. The phone number remains burned into my memory, digits that might connect me to answers I'm not sure I want to receive. This morning I walked into my office to find the frame perfectly aligned with the edge of my desk, exactly as it should be. The photograph faces forward, waves frozen mid-crash against those familiar dark rocks. My hand brushes past it to retrieve a pen, and I resist the urge to adjust what doesn't need adjusting. But I know that when I return from lunch, something will have shifted again, because that's the nature of things now. The frame refuses to stay where I left it, and I've stopped trying to understand why. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, existing in the space between certainty and doubt, between the moment we look away and the moment we look back. The photograph continues to show that same stretch of coastline, waves meeting stone in an endless cycle of approach and retreat, and I can't help but wonder what else in the room is changing when I'm not looking. Story 6. Thudded softly against the floor like a settled heartbeat echoing from beneath. I paused in the dim kitchen, the TV flickering silently in the next room, its blue glow casting erratic shapes on the walls. The sound shouldn't have been here in this tidy space, but it pulled at something tangled in the back of my mind. I moved slowly, as if not to disturb the quiet tension that hung around me, each step teasing the memory of an old wooden porch where I once sat, listening to a different kind of peace. This echo was familiar and misplaced, teasing me with its origin. As the thud repeated, a chill settled over me that nothing could warm. I hadn't heard that thud since everything changed, but now it was here. The floorboards beneath my bare feet felt different than they should have, cold, uneven in places I'd never noticed before. I pressed my palm against the counter, steadying myself, but my hand came away damp with something that wasn't water. The kitchen faucet wasn't dripping. I checked, always checking these small things now, as if they might explain the larger ones I can't quite grasp. There was a conversation once. I remember fragments of it, voices layered like sediment in my mind. Someone saying my name with a question mark at the end, as though they weren't sure I was really there. Maybe I wasn't. The memory tastes like copper pennies and feels like standing too close to a furnace. You don't remember, do you? The voice comes from nowhere, or maybe from everywhere. I turn toward the living room where the TV continues its silent dance of blue and white, but the shadows seem deeper now, more purposeful. I wonder if I spoke those words myself, or if someone else did. The distinction feels important, but I can't hold on to why. The thud comes again, beneath my feet, but also somehow behind me. I've lived in this house for how long now? The lease agreement is somewhere in the kitchen drawer with the broken handle, but I can't bring myself to look for it. Some knowledge feels dangerous to possess. I remember packing boxes, cardboard corners cutting into my palms as I lifted them, one after another, into the back of a truck that wasn't mine. The person helping me wore work gloves, heavy canvas ones with dark stains around the fingertips. They kept saying it would be better this way, a fresh start, clean slate. But slates aren't really clean, are they? They just look clean until you hold them up to the light at the right angle. The refrigerator hums, then stops. In the sudden silence, I hear something else, breathing that isn't mine, or maybe it is mine but coming from somewhere else. The basement door stands slightly ajar, though I'm certain I closed it. I'm always certain about doors. They matter more than people think. Check the foundation, someone told me once. That's where the problems start. I was holding a flashlight that kept dimming, the beam growing weaker with each step down wooden stairs that creaked in a rhythm I almost recognized. Almost. The basement smelled like wet concrete and something organic, something that had been growing in the dark for too long. But that was a different house, wasn't it? The TV screen flickers, and for just a moment I see a reflection that doesn't match my movements. The figure in the glass raises its hand while mine remain at my sides. When I blink, the reflection corrects itself, but the wrongness lingers like smoke. I find myself standing in the hallway now, though I don't remember walking here. The walls are painted a color that changes depending on the light, sometimes green, sometimes gray, sometimes the color of old bruises. There are pictures hanging in frames, but the glass reflects only darkness. I should know what those pictures show, but every time I try to focus, my vision slides away like water off a tilted surface. The thud echoes again, and this time I feel it in my chest. a resonance that makes my teeth ache. I press my ear to the floor, the wood grain rough against my cheek. Below, there's a hollow space that shouldn't exist. The blueprints I never saw probably don't account for it. Every house has secrets, the voice whispers, and I realize I'm speaking to myself, or someone is speaking through me. The distinction feels less important now. I remember a shovel leaning against a garage wall, the handle worn smooth in places where hands had gripped it repeatedly. The blade was clean, too clean, reflecting the overhead light like a mirror. Someone had taken great care with that shovel. Someone who understood the importance of maintenance. Proper tools for proper work. The phrase surfaces unbidden, carrying with it the taste of dust and the sound of earth falling onto something that wasn't earth. I was standing at the edge of something deep, watching shadows move at the bottom. But shadows don't move on their own, do they? The kitchen calls me back. I don't know how I know this, but my feet carry me there anyway, past the living room where the TV now shows static, past the hallway where the pictures have turned their faces to the wall. The faucet is dripping now, each drop marking time I can't account for. Thud. Beneath the sink, the cabinet door hangs open. Inside, pipes snake through darkness, disappearing into spaces between walls. I reach toward them, my fingers brushing against something that isn't metal, something soft, something that yields under pressure. I pull my hand back, but the sensation clings to my fingertips like a memory of touch. The pipes seem to pulse with their own rhythm, matching the sound from below. Water doesn't move that way. Water follows rules. Rules are for people who don't understand necessity. Another voice, or maybe the same voice wearing a different mask. I'm collecting voices now, storing them in places I can't quite reach. They whisper among themselves when I'm not listening, making plans I'm not meant to understand. The basement door stands wide open now. I don't remember opening it, but I must have. Who else would have done it? The stairs descend into blackness that feels thick, almost solid. I take the first step, then the second, the wood groaning under my weight as though it's bearing more than just my body. Halfway down, I pause. There's light coming from below, dim and yellow like candlelight, but I don't remember leaving any lights on. The basement should be empty. Just concrete and shadows and the steady drip of condensation from pipes that run overhead like metal veins. But it's not empty. The thud comes from directly below me now, rhythmic and patient. Something is down there waiting. Something that knows I'm coming. Something that's been waiting for me to remember. You buried it so deep, I whisper to myself, or to the darkness, or to whatever is making that sound. But deep isn't the same as gone. The flashlight appears in my hand, though I don't remember picking it up. The beam cuts through the darkness below, revealing corners and shadows that shift when I'm not looking directly at them. The concrete floor is marked with stains that could be water damage or could be something else entirely. In the center of the floor, there's a slight depression, a place where the concrete settled differently or where something underneath it changed shape over time. The thud seems to emanate from that spot as though something below is trying to communicate. I complete the descent, my bare feet touching cold concrete. The basement is larger than it should be, extending beyond the footprint of the house above. Rooms branch off into darkness, spaces that exist between the official blueprints and reality, places where intentions and actions diverge. Every house settles, I say aloud, and my voice echoes strangely, as though the walls are shaped wrong for sound. It's natural, expected. But some settling tells stories. The depression in the floor is deeper than I thought, almost a shallow grave in the concrete. The edges are smooth, deliberate. Someone took time with this. Someone who understood the importance of doing things right the first time. I kneel beside it, pressing my palm against the cool surface. The thud comes again, stronger now, vibrating through my bones. Something responds to my touch, recognizes it. Something that has been waiting patiently for me to stop running from what I know. The flashlight beam wavers, and in that moment of uncertain light, I see them. Tools arranged along the wall with careful precision. A shovel with a worn handle. Bags of something granular stacked in neat rows. A wheelbarrow positioned just so, as though someone had been interrupted mid-task and planned to return. "You do remember," the voice says, and this time I know it's mine. "You've always remembered, you just chose to forget." The thud becomes a rhythm, becomes a heartbeat, becomes the sound of earth falling onto something that should have stayed buried. I close my eyes and let the memory surface, let it fill the spaces I've kept empty for so long. The basement around me shifts, becomes a different basement in a different house with different stains on the concrete. But the tools are the same. The depression in the floor is the same. The patient rhythm from below is the same. "Some problems don't stay solved," I whisper, and the echo agrees. I rise slowly, backing toward the stairs. The flashlight beam dances across walls that seem to breathe, across corners where shadows gather like conspirators. The thud follows me up, step by step, a percussion that matches my heartbeat until I can't tell which is which. In the kitchen, I pause at the sink. The faucet drips steadily now, each drop marking the passage of time I thought I had escaped. The cabinet door beneath swings gently, as though moved by a breeze that doesn't exist. The TV in the living room shows my reflection again, but this time the figure in the glass is digging. Methodical movements, practiced efficiency, the kind of work that comes from experience, the kind of work that leaves marks on shovel handles and stains on concrete floors. I watch myself work, remembering the weight of the tools, the resistance of the earth, the careful measurements required to ensure everything fit properly. The attention to detail that would matter later when questions were asked and answers were required. "You were always good with your hands," someone had said, a compliment that felt like a curse. Natural talent for this kind of work. The thud comes again, softer now but more insistent, a reminder that some jobs are never really finished. Some problems just change location, wait for new opportunities, new basements, new concrete floors that will accept what needs to be hidden. I move through the house like a sleepwalker, touching walls and door frames and surfaces that feel both familiar and foreign. Each room holds fragments of memory, pieces of a puzzle I've been solving and unsolving for longer than I care to calculate. In the bathroom, the mirror shows a face I almost recognize, older than I expected, marked by experiences I can't quite bring into focus. But the eyes are the same. The eyes remember everything, even when the mind chooses to forget. "It followed you here," I tell my reflection, and my reflection nods in agreement. It always follows. The house settles around me, joints creaking and pipes sighing as though adjusting to accommodate new weight, new secrets, new depressions in basement floors that will smooth over time but never quite disappear. I return to the kitchen, to the spot where I first heard the thud. The sound continues, patient and rhythmic, a heartbeat echoing from beneath. But now I understand what it is, what it's always been. Not something trying to get out. Something trying to get back in. The familiar thud pulses through the floorboards, and I close my eyes, letting it wash over me like recognition, like coming home, like remembering who I really am beneath all the careful forgetting. Some sounds follow you wherever you go. Some work is never really finished. Some basements exist in every house you'll ever live in, waiting with their tools and their stains and their patient, persistent rhythms. The thud continues, soft and steady, like a settled heartbeat echoing from beneath, and I listen, finally ready to remember what I've spent so long trying to forget. Story 7. The clock chimed half a beat too late, echoing faintly into corners that should have been empty. My daily steps to the bathroom felt uncertain, the floor cool and familiar, but the reflection in the mirror blinked slower than I did. The coffee mug on the counter sat just a quarter-inch off, its handle pointing to a non-existent mark. I watched the curtains sway gently, as if touched by a non-existent breeze. With each glance, the certainty of my movements unraveled. And then the door swung open, though I hadn't touched the handle. I tell myself it was the wind. Old houses settle in peculiar ways, and the latch had been loose for weeks. These are the explanations I cling to when I reconstruct that morning, the way you might arrange photographs in an album to tell a story that makes sense. The door opened because the mechanism failed. The clock chimed late because its internal gears needed oil. The curtains moved because air currents find their way through the smallest gaps in window frames. But my hands shake as I write this, and I can't explain why. The sequence of events, as I remember them, follows a logical pattern. I had been living alone in the house for 3 months, ever since the previous tenant moved out under circumstances that remained unclear to me. The landlord, a soft-spoken man with calloused fingers, had been eager to rent the place quickly. The price was reasonable, the neighborhood quiet, and I needed somewhere to disappear for a while. That particular morning, I woke before dawn with the familiar weight of insomnia pressing against my chest. The bedroom felt smaller than usual, the walls seeming to lean inward like they were listening. I padded to the kitchen in bare feet, noting how the hardwood felt different under my toes, not warmer or cooler, but somehow more alive, as if it remembered other footsteps. I made coffee using the same routine I'd developed over those 3 months. Water from the tap, grounds measured precisely, the machine humming its mechanical song. While it brewed, I stood at the window watching the street emerge from darkness. The houses across the way remained shuttered and still, their occupants lost in sleep or private rituals I would never witness. The coffee tasted bitter that morning, though I'd used the same blend as always. I added sugar, then more sugar, but the taste lingered like something metallic had dissolved in the liquid. I set the mug down on the counter, positioning it carefully next to the small stack of unopened mail that had been accumulating for days. This is when the door opened. I heard the creak of hinges, the soft whisper of wood against carpet. When I turned, the front door stood ajar, revealing a slice of the covered porch and the gray morning beyond. No wind stirred the air, no footsteps marked the silence, just the door, open like a mouth preparing to speak. I walked over and closed it, checking the lock twice. The mechanism seemed solid enough, the deadbolt sliding home with a satisfying click. But as I returned to the kitchen, something nagged at the edges of my consciousness, a sensation like remembering a dream while trying to forget it. The rest of the morning passed without incident. I showered, dressed, and prepared to leave for my job at the library downtown. As I reached for my keys, hanging on their designated hook by the door, I noticed they weren't there. I found them eventually, sitting on the coffee table next to a book I didn't remember reading. The book's pages were marked with pencil notes in handwriting that looked almost like mine, but not quite. These details might seem insignificant to someone else, but they accumulated like sediment in still water. Each small displacement, each minor inconsistency, added weight to a growing sense that the house and I were engaged in some kind of conversation I didn't fully understand. At work, I tried to lose myself in the familiar rhythms of cataloging and shelving. The library's silence felt different from the silence at home cleaner somehow, less populated with invisible presences. But even there, surrounded by books and the occasional patron, I found myself thinking about the door. Had I really left it unlocked? Was it possible I'd opened it myself, in some half-conscious state between sleep and waking? The head librarian, a woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, asked if I was feeling well. I must have looked pale or distracted because she suggested I take the afternoon off. I declined, but spent the remaining hours moving through my tasks like someone underwater, my actions muffled and strange. When I returned home that evening, the house greeted me with its usual mixture of familiarity and unease. Everything appeared to be in its proper place, yet something felt fundamentally altered. The air carried a different scent, not unpleasant, but unfamiliar, like flowers I couldn't name or spices from a cuisine I'd never tasted. I made dinner and ate it while standing at the kitchen counter, unwilling to sit at the small table where shadows seemed to gather despite the overhead light. The food had no flavor, though I'd prepared it the same way I always did. As I washed the dishes, I caught myself glancing repeatedly at the front door, as if expecting it to open again. That night, I double-checked all the locks and windows before going to bed. I even wedged a chair under the front door handle, a precaution that felt both necessary and foolish. Sleep came eventually, but it brought dreams that felt more like memories of things that had never happened. But there's another version of that morning, one that surfaces in fragments when I'm not trying to remember. In this version, I didn't wake up alone. The sensation comes back to me in waves, the feeling of someone else's breathing in the room, slow and steady like ocean tides. Not threatening exactly, but present in a way that made my skin prickle with awareness. I remember lying very still, afraid to open my eyes, afraid to confirm what my other senses were telling me. In this version, I didn't get up to make coffee because I chose to. I got up because something drew me from the bed, a compulsion that felt like hunger but wasn't quite that simple. The kitchen looked the same but felt different, as if the familiar objects had been replaced with perfect replicas that were somehow wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. The coffee mug, I remember now that it wasn't just positioned incorrectly. It was warm when I touched it, though I hadn't yet brewed anything. The warmth felt like it came from human hands, as if someone had been holding it moments before I entered the room. And the door, in this version, the door didn't open because of a faulty latch. It opened because I unlocked it and turned the handle, though I have no memory of making that decision. My hand moved without my conscious direction, my fingers working the mechanism like they were following instructions I couldn't hear. When the door swung open, I didn't see an empty porch. I saw someone standing there, patient and still, as if they'd been waiting for me to let them in. But when I try to focus on this figure, the memory becomes slippery, like trying to hold water in cupped palms. Were they tall or short, young or old? The details scatter when I reach for them, leaving only the impression of recognition, of knowing this person in some fundamental way I couldn't explain. The keys weren't misplaced. I moved them myself, though I can't remember why. The book with the strange handwriting, I did write those notes, but not in any conscious state I can recall. The words look like my thoughts, but thoughts I never remember having. These fragments terrify me more than any conventional fear. If someone had broken into the house, if I'd been the victim of some ordinary crime, at least I would understand the nature of the threat. But this feels like a violation of reality itself, as if the basic rules that govern cause and effect had been suspended in the space around me. Sometimes I wonder if I'm losing my mind. The thought arrives with a strange kind of relief. Madness, at least, would be an explanation, but the details are too specific, too consistent in their inconsistency. Delusions, I think, would be more chaotic, less methodical in their presentation. The librarian who suggested I take the afternoon off in this other version of events, she didn't ask if I was feeling well. She asked if I was still living alone. When I said yes, she nodded in a way that suggested she knew something I didn't. Her eyes held a kind of sympathy that made my stomach clench with unnamed dread. I've started keeping a journal, trying to document these discrepancies as they occur. But when I read my entries the next day, they sometimes contain details I don't remember writing. Small additions, clarifications that feel like corrections made by someone else's hand. The handwriting looks like mine, but the thoughts feel foreign, as if they've been translated from another language and something essential was lost in the process. The house itself seems to be changing. Rooms appear smaller or larger depending on my mood. Doors that I remember being on the left side of hallways now open on the right. The bathroom mirror reflects my face, but sometimes with expressions I'm not making subtle differences in the set of my mouth or the angle of my eyebrows that suggest emotions I'm not feeling. Or emotions I'm not allowing myself to feel. I've begun to suspect that the previous tenant didn't move out voluntarily. The landlord's eagerness to rent the place, his reluctance to discuss the circumstances of the departure, these details take on new significance when viewed through the lens of my growing unease. What if something happened here? What if the house remembers? But even as I write this, I can feel the rational part of my mind pushing back, insisting on logical explanations. Houses don't remember. Doors don't open themselves. The previous tenant probably moved for perfectly ordinary reasons: a job transfer, a relationship change, financial pressures. My imagination is filling in gaps with supernatural nonsense because the alternative, that I'm experiencing some kind of psychological breakdown, is too frightening to accept. Yet the sensations persist, the feeling of being watched when I'm alone, the certainty that someone has been in the house while I'm at work, though nothing is ever missing and the locks remain intact. The growing conviction that I'm not living alone, despite all evidence to the contrary. Last night I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, soft, careful steps, as if someone was trying not to wake me. I lay in bed listening, my heart hammering against my ribs until the sounds faded into the general creaking and settling of the old house. When I finally worked up the courage to investigate, I found nothing out of place. But this morning there were 2 coffee mugs in the sink, though I only remember using one. The boundary between the 2 versions of events is dissolving. What I thought I knew and what I fear might be true are becoming indistinguishable, like watercolors bleeding into each other on wet paper. I find myself questioning not just what happened, but what's happening now in real time as I move through the house and try to maintain some sense of normalcy. The mirror in the bathroom has started to fog even when I'm not showering. The fog forms patterns that almost look like letters, but they dissipate before I can read them. The clock continues to chime at irregular intervals, sometimes early, sometimes late, as if it's keeping time for events that exist outside normal chronology. I've considered leaving, finding another place to live, but something holds me here. Not fear exactly, but a kind of morbid curiosity. I need to understand what's happening, even if the understanding destroys me. The alternative, running away without answers, feels like a form of cowardice I'm not prepared to accept. Besides, what if the phenomenon isn't tied to the house? What if it's tied to me? What if leaving would only transport the mystery to a new location, where I'd have to start the process of understanding all over again? So I remain, documenting the inconsistencies, trying to map the geography of my confusion. Some days are better than others. Some days the house feels almost normal, and I can convince myself that my imagination has been running wild. But then something happens, a door opens, a reflection behaves strangely, a voice calls my name from an empty room, and I'm forced to confront the possibility that reality is far more flexible than I ever imagined. The truth, whatever it is, hovers just beyond my comprehension, like a word on the tip of my tongue that refuses to form. I can sense its shape, its approximate weight, but I can't quite grasp it, and perhaps that's for the best. Perhaps some truths are too large or too strange for human consciousness to contain. All I know for certain is that the door opened that morning and something came through. Whether that something was real or imagined, benevolent or malevolent, I may never know. But it's here now, woven into the fabric of my daily existence, and I'm learning to live with the uncertainty. The clock just chimed again, 3 beats too early this time. The coffee mug has moved another 1/4 inch, and somewhere in the house I can hear the soft whisper of movement, as if someone is rearranging furniture in rooms I never enter. I should be terrified, but instead I feel oddly calm. Whatever is happening here, I'm part of it now. The question isn't whether I can solve the mystery, but whether I can survive becoming it. Story 8. The gravel crunched underfoot without echo. I scanned the dim horizon, feeling the air shift around me, but the trees remained unnervingly still. The door, once dependable, yielded instantly without the comforting click I anticipated. Each room drew me further into a quiet that seemed to deepen, soaking up every footstep. I hesitated before the mirror, expecting my own eyes to confirm my presence. But the reflection offered nothing familiar, just a surface refusing to acknowledge my gaze. That smell keeps coming back, sweet but wrong somehow, like flowers left too long in water or fruit that's turned but still looks perfect from the outside. I catch it when I'm not expecting it, and suddenly I'm somewhere else entirely. The kitchen window was open, had to be. The curtains moved in a way that suggested breeze, though I don't remember feeling any air on my skin. Someone was making coffee. The sound of the machine, that familiar gurgling, but when I turned to look. Nothing, just the counter, clean as always, too clean. I keep trying to remember what brought me back to this place. Was it a phone call, a letter? The fragments won't line up properly, like trying to assemble a puzzle where the pieces have been cut from different pictures. There's a voice in my head, patient but insistent, asking the same question over and over. Why didn't you come sooner? But I don't know who's asking. The floorboards upstairs creak in a pattern, 3 short sounds, then a pause, then 2 more. I've counted them so many times now that the rhythm has become a kind of heartbeat in the walls. When I climb the stairs to investigate, the sounds stop. When I come back down, they resume. Someone lived here once, lives here still, maybe. There are signs everywhere if you know how to look. A coffee mug with the faintest ring of residue. Newspapers folded in a particular way. The bathroom mirror fogged with condensation that shouldn't exist in an empty house. I found photographs, but the faces have been carefully removed from each one. Not torn out in anger, but cut with precision, surgical. The backgrounds remain intact: birthday parties, holiday gatherings, ordinary moments frozen in time. Bodies without identities, celebrations without celebrants. The basement door was locked when I first arrived, I'm certain of that. The key hung on a hook beside the frame, but when I tried it, the mechanism wouldn't turn. Now the door stands slightly ajar and I can't remember unlocking it. The key is back on its hook, but it feels different somehow, warmer than it should be. You always were forgetful, the voice says, and this time I'm sure I hear it aloud. But when I spin around, there's only that persistent quiet, thick as wool. The refrigerator hums a tune I almost recognize. Inside, the shelves are bare except for a single jar of something I can't identify. The label has been removed, leaving only sticky residue and the ghost of words. When I hold it up to the light, the contents shift like liquid, but they're too dark to see clearly. I should leave. Every instinct tells me to walk back through that door and never return. But my keys aren't where I left them, and when I check my pockets, they're empty except for a folded piece of paper I don't remember putting there. The handwriting is mine, but I have no memory of forming these words. Look in the garden shed. The garden is overgrown, choked with weeds that reach my waist, but there's a path worn smooth by frequent use, recent use. The grass is pressed down in footprints too large to be mine, leading from the back door to a small wooden structure I hadn't noticed before. The shed smells like rust and old leather. Tools hang on pegboard walls, each one outlined in black marker so you know immediately if something was missing. A shovel is gone from its designated space. The outline remains, accusatory in its emptiness. There's a workbench covered with a tarp. Underneath, I find more photographs. These still have faces, but they're all of the same person at different ages. A child in a school picture, a teenager at graduation, an adult at what might be a wedding. The progression is normal, natural, except for the eyes. In every photo, the eyes have been colored over with black ink. You remember now, the voice says, and this time it's coming from behind me. But when I turn, there's only my own shadow cast by the single bare bulb, and the shadow seems wrong somehow. Too tall or too wide or moving independently of my body. I'm back in the house, though I don't recall walking from the shed. The basement door is fully open now, and there's light coming from below. Not electric light, something warmer, more flickering. The stairs descend into a space that seems larger than the house's foundation should allow. The walls down here are lined with newspaper clippings, all yellowed with age. Headlines about disappearances, about searches called off, about families who stopped asking questions. In the center of each article, a name has been highlighted in the same black ink used on the photographs. The same name over and over. My name. The furnace kicks on with a sound like breathing, and suddenly the basement fills with that sweet, wrong smell. Stronger now, almost overwhelming. I follow it to a corner where the concrete floor looks newer than the rest, where someone has taken great care to make everything level and smooth. There's a calendar on the wall, but all the dates have been crossed out except for one. Today's date, circled in red ink that still looks wet. You came back, the voice says, and now I understand it's not coming from somewhere else. It's coming from inside my own head, but it's not my voice. It belongs to someone I used to know, someone I've been trying very hard not to remember. The mirror upstairs reflects nothing because there's nothing left to reflect. I understand that now. I've been walking through this house, opening doors and climbing stairs and searching through rooms, but I'm not really here. Haven't been here for a very long time. The gravel outside crunches under footsteps that aren't mine, and I hear the door open with that missing click I'd been expecting. Someone calls my name from the kitchen, but it sounds distant and hollow, like an echo of something that happened before. I try to answer, but no sound comes out. The photographs on the workbench weren't of a stranger. They were of me at different times, in different seasons of a life I'm only now remembering in fragments. The black ink over the eyes wasn't meant to hide an identity. It was meant to show what was already gone. That sweet smell isn't flowers or fruit. It's something else entirely, something that's been here much longer than I have, something that's been waiting patiently for me to remember why I came back. The voice in my head grows quieter now, satisfied. You always were forgetful, it says one last time, but you never could stay away. The basement light flickers and dims, but I don't need it anymore. I know where I am now. I know why the house feels so familiar, why the mirrors won't show my reflection, why my footsteps make no sound on the gravel. I know why I came back. The door upstairs closes with the click I'd been waiting for, and the house settles back into its patient quiet. Somewhere in the walls, the floorboards resume their rhythm. 3 short sounds, a pause, then 2 more, like a heartbeat that's learned to keep time with something that stopped beating long ago. That smell lingers sweet and wrong, mixing with the dust motes that dance in the fading light. And in the silence that follows, I finally understand what I've been trying so hard to forget. The gravel crunches again, but softer now, like a whisper of what used to be. Story 9. The old hinge didn't groan this morning. My fingers traced over its familiar texture, but there was no complaint from the metal. The kitchen light, always so quick to flicker alive, remained dim after the switch's click. I moved through the hall, past walls that absorbed every echo, as if guarding secrets within their plaster. The grandfather clock stood inert, its pendulum still where it should have swayed. My shadow hesitated in the mirror, a little less certain, as if questioning my next move. The smell comes first, always the smell. Something sweet underneath something else, something I can't name, like flowers left too long in water. I wake up and it's there, clinging to the edges of my consciousness like smoke. I was standing in the doorway again, the same doorway, but which doorway? The wood grain swirls in patterns that seem familiar, yet when I try to focus, they shift. My hand rests on the frame and I remember the splinter. There was always a splinter there, catching at sleeves, at skin, drawing tiny drops of blood that I'd suck away without thinking. You're imagining things. Was that what I said or what someone said to me? The voice echoes in the hollow space behind my eyes, neither male nor female, neither young nor old, just words floating in the void where my certainty used to be. The kitchen table held something. I can see my hands moving across its surface, searching. The wood was scarred from years of use, marked with ring stains and knife cuts. But what was I looking for? My fingers remember the motion, the desperate sweeping back and forth, but the object remains just out of reach in my memory. There were footsteps above, heavy, deliberate. Each creak of the floorboards sent vibrations through the house, through my bones. I counted them once. 1, 2, 3, 4, then silence, always silence after 4. But was I downstairs listening up, or upstairs listening down? The phone rang, or maybe it didn't. Maybe that's just the sound my mind makes when it's trying to fill in the gaps. The receiver was black, heavy in my hand, cold plastic against my ear. A voice on the other end, distant and crackling. Are you still there? I must have answered, but I don't remember what I said. The conversation dissolves like sugar in water, leaving only the aftertaste of anxiety. I keep coming back to the basement door. It's painted white, or was once. Now it's yellowed around the edges like old paper. The handle is brass, tarnished green in places. When I turn it, there's resistance, not locked, just reluctant, as if the door itself doesn't want to open. The stairs descend into darkness. Wooden steps, some loose, some missing entirely. I can feel my foot searching for purchase, finding only air. The sensation of falling without falling, that jolt that wakes you from sleep. Don't go down there. Another voice, this one clearer, urgent, but I can't place it, can't attach it to a face or a moment. It just hangs there in the space between what I remember and what I've forgotten. The light bulb at the bottom of the stairs swings on its cord, back and forth, casting moving shadows on the concrete walls, but I don't remember touching it, don't remember anything that would set it in motion. There's a box, cardboard, water damaged, sitting on a metal shelf. When I lift the lid, the smell intensifies, that sweet, cloying scent that makes my stomach turn. Inside there are papers, documents, photographs. But every time I try to look directly at them, they blur, like trying to read in a dream. The harder I focus, the more indistinct they become. I was running, my feet on pavement, on grass, on gravel. The sound changes with each surface, but the rhythm stays the same. Fast, panicked, my breath coming in short gasps. Behind me something follows, not footsteps exactly, but a presence. A weight in the air that presses against my back. The house comes into view, but it's different somehow. The windows are dark, reflecting nothing. The front door stands open, a black rectangle against the white siding. I slow down, then stop. My hand reaches for the gate latch, but I can't make myself open it. You can't run from this. The voice again, closer now, almost inside my head. I turn around, but there's no one there. Just the empty street, the broken street light, the shadows that seem too deep for the amount of darkness available. Inside again, the living room, the couch where I used to sit, where someone used to sit beside me. The cushions still hold the impression of a body, but whose body? The fabric is worn smooth in places, rough in others. My fingers trace the pattern without my permission. The television flickers to life, static at first, then images, faces I almost recognize, voices speaking words I almost understand. The remote control is nowhere to be found, but the channels change anyway. Click, click, click. A news report, something about a disappearance. The reporter's mouth moves, but the sound is delayed like a badly dubbed movie. Behind her, police cars, yellow tape, people standing around looking serious. I lean forward trying to make sense of it. The camera pans across a crowd of onlookers, and for just a moment I think I see myself. But when I blink, the image changes. Now it's a commercial for laundry detergent, happy families, clean clothes, bright smiles. The kitchen again, the refrigerator hums its constant song. Inside, the shelves are mostly empty. A carton of milk expired, a loaf of bread growing mold, an apple brown and soft. When did I last go shopping? When did I last eat? My reflection in the refrigerator's surface looks wrong, distorted. The features are mine, but arranged differently, as if someone took a photograph and put it back together incorrectly. The phone book is open on the counter, pages and pages of names and numbers. My finger runs down the columns, but I don't know what I'm looking for. The names blur together. Smith, Johnson, Williams, Brown, generic surnames hiding specific secrets. There's a number circled in red ink. The pen mark is fresh, the ink still bright, but I don't remember making it, don't recognize the number. When I dial it, the phone rings and rings. No answer, no voicemail, just the hollow sound of emptiness echoing back at me. The bedroom upstairs, the bed is unmade, sheets twisted and damp with sweat. The pillows still hold the shape of heads, but how many heads? 1, 2. The indentations seem wrong, too deep, too permanent. The closet door is ajar. Inside, clothes hang like empty people. shirts and dresses and coats, all waiting for bodies to fill them. I push them aside, looking for something. The hangers scrape against the rod, a sound like fingernails on chalkboard. At the back of the closet there's a box, smaller than the one in the basement. This one is wooden with a brass latch. When I open it, music plays. A tiny ballerina spins in circles, her painted face forever smiling. The melody is familiar, but I can't place it. Something from childhood maybe, or maybe not. Underneath the ballerina there are letters, handwritten in careful cursive. The ink has faded, but the words are still readable. Love letters, apologies, promises, but the names have been blacked out with heavy marker strokes. My dearest, I'm sorry for it. Please forgive me for. The sentences trail off incomplete. The stories they tell are fragments, pieces of a puzzle with too many missing parts. I'm in the car now. When did I get in the car? The keys are in my hand, cold metal against warm palm. The engine turns over reluctantly, coughing to life like an old man with bad lungs. The road stretches ahead, empty and gray. The yellow lines blur past, hypnotic in their repetition. The radio plays static, occasionally resolving into snippets of music or conversation before dissolving back into white noise. In the rearview mirror, the house grows smaller, but it never quite disappears. Even when I can no longer see it, I feel its presence behind me, a weight on my shoulders, a whisper in my ear. The gas station appears like a mirage. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead, casting everything in harsh, artificial brightness. The attendant behind the counter looks up when I enter, but his face is a blur. Features that shift and change when I'm not looking directly at them. Can I help you? The question hangs in the air between us. Can he help me? Can anyone help me? I want to ask him if he's seen me before, if he remembers anything about the last time I was here, but the words stick in my throat like glue. I buy a bottle of water and a pack of gum. The transaction feels surreal, like playing house. The money in my wallet is unfamiliar, bills I don't remember earning or withdrawing. The receipt the attendant hands me is already fading, the numbers becoming illegible even as I watch. Back in the car, the water tastes like metal. The gum loses its flavor immediately, becoming a tasteless wad in my mouth. I spit it out the window and watch it disappear into the darkness. The road branches ahead, left or right. The choice feels monumentous, weighted with consequences I can't foresee. I sit at the intersection, engine idling while my mind races through possibilities. A car appears behind me, headlights filling my mirrors with white light. It waits patiently while I make my decision. No honking, no pressure, just presence. When I finally turn left, it turns left too. When I speed up, it speeds up. When I slow down, it maintains the same distance. The house again, but how did I get back here? The car is in the driveway, keys still in my hand. The front door is still open, still that black rectangle of invitation or warning. Inside, everything is exactly as I left it. The television still flickering through channels, the refrigerator still humming, the stairs still creaking under invisible feet. But something has changed. The air feels different, charged with possibility or menace. The shadows have shifted, revealing corners I hadn't noticed before. The silence has weight now, substance. The basement door stands open. I don't remember opening it. The stairs descend into darkness, but there's a light at the bottom now, weak and yellow like a dying flashlight. I take the first step. The wood groans under my weight, a sound like the old hinge that didn't groan this morning. Each step down is a step deeper into something I'm not sure I want to understand. The box is still there, but it's been moved, closer to the stairs as if it wanted to be found. The lid is off, contents spilled across the concrete floor, papers and photographs scattered like leaves. I kneel down and begin to gather them up. Each piece is a fragment of something larger, a story told in disconnected images and half-finished sentences. A birth certificate with the name blacked out, a marriage license torn in half, a police report, most of the text obscured by water damage. And photographs, so many photographs, faces that might be familiar, might be strangers, places that could be anywhere, could be nowhere. Moments frozen in time, but which time, when, why? One photograph stops me cold. It's the house, this house, but different. The windows are bright with light, the door is closed, there are people on the porch smiling at the camera. Their faces are clear, distinct, real. But when I look closer, when I really focus, the details begin to shift. The faces blur, the smiles become uncertain. The light in the windows dims until it's just reflection, just empty glass staring back at nothing. You're remembering now. The voice is right behind me. I spin around, but there's no one there. Just the empty basement, the swinging light bulb, the shadows that dance on the walls like living things. But I am remembering, pieces clicking into place like bones in a skeleton. The footsteps upstairs, the phone calls, the car following me, the box of photographs, the smell of flowers left too long in water. I climb the stairs, each step bringing me closer to something I've been avoiding. The kitchen waits for me, patient and familiar. The table where I searched for something I couldn't name. The refrigerator with its distorted reflection. The phone that may or may not have rung. The old hinge catches my attention again. My fingers trace its familiar texture, but now I understand why it didn't groan this morning. It's been oiled recently. The metal is smooth, silent. Someone has been here. Someone who knew about the hinge, about its tendency to complain. The kitchen light flickers once, twice, then steadies. In its glow, I see things I missed before. A cup in the sink, still warm. A newspaper folded to the obituaries. A set of keys that aren't mine hanging by the door. The grandfather clock begins to tick. Slow, measured, counting off seconds that feel like hours. Its pendulum swings back and forth, marking time I thought had stopped. My reflection in the hallway mirror looks different now. More solid, more real, but also more frightened. The eyes that stare back at me hold knowledge I'm not sure I want to claim. The smell returns, stronger than before, sweet and cloying and wrong. It leads me through the house like a trail of breadcrumbs, up the stairs, down the hall, to the bedroom where the unmade bed waits. But now I can see what I missed before. The second pillow isn't empty. There's an impression there, recent and warm. The sheets on that side of the bed are pulled back as if someone just got up, just left. The closet door swings open by itself, revealing the hanging clothes that look like empty people. But they're not empty now. They move slightly, as if stirred by breath, as if someone is hiding among them, watching me through the gaps between hangers. The music box plays its tinkling melody, the ballerina spinning her eternal dance, but the letters underneath have changed. The black marker strokes have faded, revealing names I recognize, words I remember writing, promises I remember making. And breaking. The truth settles over me like dust, coating everything in a fine layer of understanding I don't want to accept. The footsteps upstairs were mine. The phone calls were to numbers I knew by heart. The car following me was driven by someone who had every right to know where I was going. The photographs in the basement tell a story I helped write. The documents bear signatures I recognize as my own. The smell of flowers comes from bouquets I brought home, left to wilt and rot while I pretended not to notice their decay. I walk back to the kitchen, to the old hinge that didn't groan this morning. My fingers trace its familiar texture, but now I know why it's been silenced. Now I understand what the quiet means. Someone has been here, someone who knows this house as well as I do. Someone who has keys and reasons and patience enough to wait for me to remember what I've tried so hard to forget. The kitchen light flickers again, and in its uncertain glow, I see a shadow that isn't mine. It moves independently, disconnected from my body, acting out scenes I refuse to acknowledge. The grandfather clock continues its steady count, marking time that has already passed, measuring moments that have already been lived. Its pendulum swings like a metronome, keeping rhythm for a song I don't want to hear. My reflection in the mirror wavers, becoming less certain with each passing second. The face that looks back at me is familiar but strange, like meeting someone you knew in childhood after years of separation. The old hinge doesn't groan this morning because someone oiled it. The kitchen light stays dim because someone loosened the bulb. The walls absorb every echo because someone needs the silence to think, to plan, to remember. The grandfather clock stands still because time has stopped meaning anything in this house where past and present blur together like watercolors in rain. My shadow hesitates in the mirror because it knows what I'm only beginning to understand. It questions my next move because it knows there may not be a next move to make. The smell of flowers lingers in the air, sweet and cloying and familiar. It's the smell of memory, of things left undone, of truths buried so deep they've begun to rot. And somewhere in this house, in the spaces between what I remember and what I've forgotten, someone waits for me to put the pieces together. Someone who knows the story I've been trying not to tell. The old hinge doesn't groan this morning, and in its silence, I hear everything I've been trying not to understand. Story 10. Every morning the drawer would open with a soft scrape and a gentle thud. It was a daily routine that began each day, so regular that it barely registered anymore. But then one morning the drawer was slightly ajar when I awoke. A few days later, a misplaced pen had slid to the wrong side. Today the drawer remains firmly shut, though I never closed it. Yet somehow it's the second scratch on the wood that bothers me most. The scratch. The second scratch runs parallel to the first, about an inch below it. Both marks slice through the honey-colored finish of the nightstand, exposing pale wood underneath. I've stared at these scratches for weeks now, trying to remember when they appeared. The first one I could explain a careless moment with my watch, perhaps, or the corner of a book dragged too hastily across the surface. But the second scratch haunts me because it's too deliberate, too precise. It matches the first in length and depth, as if someone took great care to create a pair. When I run my finger along its edge, the wood feels sharp, fresh, not weathered like something that's been there for months. The pen. The pen is blue, ordinary, the kind you pick up at any store without thinking. I found it on the left side of the drawer when it should have been on the right, nestled in the small compartment where I keep my reading glasses. The ink still flows smoothly when I test it against paper, leaving behind a steady stream of midnight blue. But I don't remember buying this pen. I don't remember placing it in the drawer. My usual pen black with a silver clip that catches the morning light sits exactly where I left it, undisturbed. The blue pen feels foreign in my hand, too light, too smooth. When I hold it up to examine the barrel, I notice tiny teeth marks near the cap, as if someone spent long hours chewing thoughtfully on the plastic. The morning light. Sunlight filters through the bedroom window differently now. The angle seems wrong, casting shadows that fall in unfamiliar patterns across the hardwood floor. The rectangle of brightness that usually stretches from the window to the foot of the bed now stops short, blocked by something I can't identify. When I stand in the exact spot where the light should hit, I feel cold instead of warm. The shadows have edges that seem too sharp, too defined, creating pockets of darkness that shouldn't exist in a room with such large windows. I've checked the glass for obstructions, tree branches, accumulated dust, anything that might explain the change. The window is clean, unobstructed, yet the light continues to behave as if something invisible stands between it and the room. The carpet indentations. 4 small depressions mark the carpet beside the bed, perfectly round and evenly spaced. They form a rectangle about the size of a chair, though no chair has ever stood in that spot. The carpet fibers remain compressed despite my attempts to fluff them back to their original height. When I press my palm against the indentations, they feel permanent, as if something heavy rested there for a very long time. The surrounding carpet shows no signs of wear or disturbance, making the 4 marks appear sudden and inexplicable. I've tried placing different objects in the space, a small table, a laundry basket, even a stack of books, but nothing creates the same pattern of indentations. The mirror's reflection. The mirror above the dresser reflects everything in the room except for one corner. Not the corner itself, but what should be in it. When I look directly at the space, I see the usual arrangement. A small plant on a wooden stand, a stack of magazines, the corner of a picture frame. But in the mirror, that corner appears empty, showing only wall and baseboard. I've cleaned the mirror obsessively, checking for distortions in the glass or tricks of lighting that might explain the discrepancy. The reflection remains stubbornly incomplete, as if the mirror refuses to acknowledge something that clearly exists. When I move the plant to a different location, the mirror reflects it perfectly. When I return it to the corner, it vanishes from the reflected world. The scent of lavender asterisk. Lavender drifts through the room at odd hours, strongest near the nightstand drawer. I don't use lavender soap, lotion, or perfume. No sachets hide in my drawers, no air fresheners plug into the walls. Yet the scent appears without warning, subtle at first, then overwhelming in its sweetness. It reminds me of something I can't quite grasp, a memory that hovers just beyond reach. The fragrance seems to pulse, growing stronger when I approach the drawer and fading when I move away. I've searched every inch of the room for its source, checking inside books, behind furniture, even inside the heating vents. The lavender exists without explanation, as if the air itself has decided to carry this particular memory. The digital clock. The red numbers on the clock face sometimes flicker between different times. Not randomly, the flickering follows a pattern I'm beginning to recognize. The displayed time will shift backward by exactly 17 minutes, hold for a few seconds, then return to the correct time. This happens most often in the early morning hours, between the time I wake and when I finally rise from bed. I've replaced the batteries, checked the electrical connections, even bought a new clock entirely. The behavior continues with each replacement, as if the problem isn't with the device but with time itself in this room. The 17-minute discrepancy feels significant, though I can't remember why that particular span of time should matter. The photograph asterisk. A photograph sits on the dresser, showing a garden I don't recognize. The image is crisp and recent, printed on quality paper with rich colors that seem to glow in the morning light. Roses climb a white trellis in the background, while neat rows of vegetables fill the foreground. A pair of gardening gloves lies abandoned beside a small spade, as if someone stepped away mid-task and never returned. I don't remember taking this photograph or having it developed. It wasn't on the dresser when I went to sleep, yet here it stands in a silver frame that matches the others perfectly. The garden looks well tended and loved, but entirely foreign to me. When I study the image closely, I notice a shadow in the corner that might be a person, though the figure is too indistinct to identify. The floorboard asterisk. One particular floorboard creaks differently than the others, not louder or softer, but with a different pitch, a hollow sound that seems to echo longer than it should. The board sits directly in front of the nightstand, right where someone would stand to open the drawer. I've tested every floorboard in the room, walking back and forth to map the various sounds they make under pressure. Most produce the expected groans and squeaks of settling wood. But this one board sings a different note, almost musical in its resonance. When I kneel and examine it closely, I notice the nails holding it in place look newer than the others, their heads still bright and unmarked by age. The book. A book lies open on the nightstand, though I don't remember reading it. The pages show a story about a woman who begins to doubt her own memories, questioning whether the things she remembers actually happened, or if they're elaborate constructions of a mind trying to make sense of fragments. The prose is elegant but unsettling, filled with descriptions of objects that appear and disappear, of rooms that change when no one is looking. Marginal notes fill the spaces around the text, written in handwriting that looks almost like mine but not quite. The annotations ask questions. How can you be sure? And what if you're wrong? And who moved the pen? The book's spine shows no title, and the cover has been removed entirely. The silence asterisk. The quality of silence in the room has changed. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of a different kind of quiet, thick and expectant. Normal household noises, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of clocks, the settling of the building seem muffled here, as if the room exists slightly apart from the rest of the world. When I speak aloud, my voice sounds flat and strange, lacking the usual resonance of sound bouncing off walls and furniture. The silence feels occupied, as if someone else is holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. Even my own breathing seems too loud in this altered quiet, intrusive and unwelcome. The dust pattern. Dust settles everywhere except on top of the nightstand drawer. The dresser, the window sill, the picture frames all accumulate the fine layer of particles that drift through any lived-in space. But the surface of the nightstand remains clean, as if it's wiped down regularly by invisible hands. When I deliberately scatter a light coating of powder across the wood, it disappears by the next morning, leaving behind the same pristine surface. No cloth marks or streaks suggest human cleaning. The dust simply vanishes, as if the nightstand exists in its own microclimate where particles cannot settle. This cleanliness extends only to the top surface. The sides and legs of the piece accumulate dust normally. The temperature asterisk. The air around the nightstand runs several degrees cooler than the rest of the room. Not dramatically so, but enough to notice when you stand close enough to open the drawer. The temperature difference creates the slightest movement in the air, a barely perceptible current that stirs loose papers and makes curtains shift almost imperceptibly. I've checked for drafts, examined the windows for gaps, tested the heating system for irregularities. Everything functions normally, yet this pocket of cool air persists. When I hold my hand above the drawer, I can feel the boundary where normal room temperature gives way to this inexplicable chill. The sensation reminds me of standing near an open refrigerator, though no mechanical source could explain it. The drawer handle. The brass handle of the drawer bears the subtle impression of fingers, worn smooth by countless hands, but the wear pattern doesn't match my grip. My fingers are longer, my thumb rests in a different position when I pull the drawer open. The impressions in the metal suggest smaller hands, more delicate fingers that grip the handle with particular care. The brass shows other signs of use too. Tiny scratches that form no pattern I recognize, and a slight discoloration where a ring might have knocked against the metal repeatedly. When I wrap my hand around the handle, it feels familiar and foreign at once, as if I'm following the motions of someone else's routine. The content. Inside the drawer, objects arrange themselves with suspicious precision. The reading glasses always return to the same angle. The small notebook lies perfectly parallel to the drawer's edge, and the various pens and pencils align themselves like soldiers in formation. I've tested this phenomenon by deliberately disturbing the arrangement before bed, scattering items randomly throughout the drawer's interior. By morning, everything has returned to its prescribed position. The organization follows a logic I don't remember establishing, yet it feels absolutely correct. Each item has its designated space, and deviation from this order seems to trigger an automatic correction. The blue pen, the interloper, has somehow earned its own position in this mysterious system. The notebook. A small leather notebook sits in the drawer's back corner, filled with observations written in my handwriting. The entries describe changes in the room, the movement of objects, variations in light, the appearance of unfamiliar items, but I don't remember writing these notes. The handwriting is mine. I recognize the particular way I form certain letters, the slight rightward slant of my script, yet the words feel like discoveries rather than memories. The observations are meticulous and detailed, recording phenomena I've only recently begun to notice. According to the dates in the notebook, I've been documenting these changes for months. The final entry, dated yesterday, consists of a single question: what happens when you stop pretending not to remember? The realization asterisk. The drawer sits before me now, closed and silent. I understand that opening it will reveal the same carefully arranged contents, the same mysterious blue pen, the same notebook filled with observations I don't remember making. The scratches in the wood tell a story I'm afraid to read completely. The lavender scent grows stronger as I reach for the handle, and the cool air stirs around my fingers. In the mirror's reflection, I can see myself sitting on the edge of the bed, but something about the image seems delayed, as if the mirror is showing me moments from the past rather than the present. The floorboard creaks its hollow note under my feet, and the silence in the room grows deeper, more expectant. My hand hovers above the brass handle, and I realize that the choice to open or not to open the drawer may not be mine to make. The routine has its own momentum now, its own logic, and I am simply the instrument through which it expresses itself.